Hey guys! Tonight we venture into the heart of ancient Sumer to chase a city lost beneath floodwaters. The legendary bronze metropolis called Aratta. You might not survive the first day. Just kidding? Or am I? But stick around, and I promise it'll feel like you're wading through reed-choked marshes yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me what city you're in and what time it is where you are right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the water's edge of the Euphrates plain, reeds brushing your ankles as a distant chant drifts across slow-moving currents. In this morning gray light, the surface gleams like tarnished bronze, an apt mirror for Aratta, the city that poets claimed once ruled these lands before the great Sumerian flood. You lean forward, tracing ripples as if they might spell out the ancient name on their surface. Mainstream historians tell us that Sumerian culture thrived between 4500 and 1900 BCE, with city-states like Uruk and Ur anchoring civilization's dawn. Aratta, in contrast, shines mostly in myth, yet whispers of its bronze forges and splendid temples flicker through cuneiform tablets. As you step onto the muddy bank, you feel the soft give of sediment beneath your sandals, earth still nursing memories of tremors and inundations. Obscure scribes once recorded that Aratta's bronze artisans rivaled even Uruk's master smiths, forging statues and vessels gleaming like captured sunlight. You can almost taste the smoke and hear hammer on anvil, hammer on anvil, hammer on anvil echoing across time. Historians are still debating whether Aratta was a real trading partner or a moral symbol woven into Sumer's epic songs. Some argue it represents a distant kingdom beyond the mountains, while others insist it was purely allegorical. You wander farther, following faint ground lines that hint at buried walls. Sumerian laments describe the city's temples rising like mountains of bronze. Yet modern surveys find only low mounds half submerged in clay. You kneel to touch a shard of pottery, its surface etched with a delicate pattern of spirals. This design matches fragments unearthed near the Zagros foothills, suggesting Aratta's influence reached farther than once thought. A little-known fact: one hymn to the goddess Inanna mentions pearls from Aratta's river, even though no local river yields pearls today. Myth and material culture blend in surprising ways. Pressing on, you reach the foot of a low ridge where reed beds part to reveal what looks like the top of an ancient wall. Here, the epic of En-mer-kar and the Lord of Aratta comes alive. You can almost hear the clack of reed styluses on clay tablets as scribes copied the tale of King En-mer-kar's bold mission, sending messages carved on tablets to Aratta's ruler, demanding tribute of precious metals and lapis lazuli. Mainstream accounts place that epic around 2600 BCE, making it one of the earliest recorded diplomatic dramas in human history. You step into imagined dialogue. Messenger, you whisper, carry this tablet across treacherous passes. Tell the Lord of Aratta that En-mer-kar awaits his obedience. A breeze ruffles your hair as though the gods themselves are listening. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Sumerians had no alphabet. Every sign represents a word or syllable. To write Aratta, they used two signs, one for alone and one for copper, an odd combo that hints at the city's famed metalwork. Scholars still puzzle over why they paired those signs exactly that way. Night begins to settle, and you light a torch, revealing glints of mica in the earth, remnants of a plaster floor, perhaps part of a palace hall. Obscure geological studies suggest these mica flecks are common in soils once swept by flash floods. You crouch to scoop some into your palm. The glittering grains feel like cosmic breadcrumbs linking past to present. Meanwhile, debates rage in academic circles. Was Aratta a single sprawling city or a confederation of smaller towns bound by trade? Historians are still debating this question. You rise and walk across slightly higher ground where a trickle of water seeps from between stones. The Sumerian flood myth, later echoed in Gilgamesh, speaks of a cataclysm so vast it swallowed whole cities. You picture clay tablets telling how Enki, god of wisdom and fresh water, unleashed massive inundations to punish humanity's pride. Yet here, the flood may be no mythical deluge but centuries of seasonal floods and river shifts. An archaeological fringe theory claims these events created natural levees that entombed settlements under layers of silt. Whether that's true remains hotly contested among specialists. Your torchlight reveals the curve of a worn cylinder seal half embedded in mud. You carefully loosen it, thin, cylindrical, and carved with tiny figures. A king receiving tribute, a goddess hovering above. Cylinder seals were the personal signatures of ancient elites, rolled across wet clay to authenticate documents. A little-known fact: some seals contained invisible inscriptions only visible under certain angles of light, likely to deter forgery. Archaeologists still debate how widespread that practice was. A chill rises as you approach an irregular pit. Family legend in Uruk held that refugees from Aratta fled during the flood, carrying their god statues to new sanctuaries. You scan the pit's charcoal-stained walls, perhaps an emergency shrine where villagers hid their idols. Mainstream archaeology confirms that when Sumerian cities faced threats, they often buried sacred images beneath household floors for safekeeping. Yet no clear record ties that ritual directly to Aratta's demise. Historians keep arguing whether lumps of fused bronze found in some pits are melted idols or remains of workshop slag. Walking on, you find a patch of ground littered with small, dark green stones, possibly early obsidian trade goods that arrived via mountain routes. Aratta may have exported copper and in return imported obsidian for cutting tools. You pop one into your mouth to test its smoothness. Don't do that at home. But hey, you're a daring midnight explorer. Obsidian trade in Sumer was vital. Without it, no sharply edged blades. Scholars still debate the precise routes, through the Taurus or Zagros. The answer could rewrite our understanding of early trade networks. Suddenly, the soil shifts, and you stumble over a stone column base. Circular, carved with a repeating zigzag pattern. Could this be the remains of Aratta's famed temple of Inanna? Inanna's worship was central to Sumerian religion, tied to fertility and war. Her temple in Uruk, the Yanna complex, rivaled all others. If Aratta boasted a sister temple, it must have been awe-inspiring. An obscure tablet mentions golden gates to Aratta's sanctuary, gates that archaeologists have never found. But then again, entire buildings lie buried under meters of sediment. You settle on a patch of dry earth, unroll a fragmentary tablet, and read, "The mountain sheep bleat at dawn/bronze anointed the altar." This hymn hints at ritual sacrifices dedicated to bronze tools, tools that carried divine power. You imagine priests anointing axes and chisels with oils, chanting so metal itself becomes sacred. Obscure ethnographic parallels exist. Some remote Andean cultures believed metal possessed spirits. Whether Sumerians thought the same remains under scholarly debate. The night air sharpens with humidity as you follow a low wall that curves eastward, maybe part of a city gate. Gates in Sumerian cities were heavily fortified, often adorned with protective deities. You recall that at nearby Uar, the famous royal cemetery revealed mosaic panels made of lapis and shell. Aratta's gates might have sparkled similarly. Another reason the ancients spoke of bronze mountains. Mainstream evidence shows lapis lazuli was imported from beyond the Hindu Kush, making any city that displayed it a powerhouse in prestige and wealth. You rise, brushing dust from your knees, and gaze at the river's dark silhouette. The water level seems unnaturally high, as if still swollen from an age-old surge. You picture the moment when floodwaters rose above temple walls, carrying away statues and scrolls alike. The Sumerian phrase, "the waters covered the land like a roof," conveys that terror. Yet, many scholars argue the myth conflates multiple flooding events over centuries. Historians are still debating which floods inspired the epic. Your torch flickers as you wander toward a cluster of reed-covered mounds. Here, geomagnetic surveys have detected low-resistance zones, possibly adobe foundations of houses. You crouch beside an excavation trench, imagining potter's wheel and kiln working day and night. Bronze Age metallurgists used charcoal-fired furnaces reaching 1,000 degrees Celsius. Scattered slag in this zone suggests a major workshop once stood here. An obscure tidbit: Sumerians mixed arsenic with copper to produce a harder bronze alloy centuries before the Greeks. A hush falls as you approach an eroded stairway, steps leading into dark earth. You hesitate, aware that real digs use lamps. You push deeper into the marsh, reeds whispering around your calves as if conspiring to tell tales older than any tablet. The morning mist clings to tall stalks, turning each blade into a silver filament that catches the pale light. Underfoot, the water is ankle-deep, cold against your skin, and you feel every soft ripple radiate through the soles of your sandals. Here, in these reed-choked plains, the murmur of water and wind becomes a language of its own, one that hints at Aratta's long-buried presence. You pause and tilt your head as a faint croon drifts from somewhere ahead, perhaps the cry of a marsh harrier or, if you believe local lore, the voice of a river spirit named Idigna. In Sumerian religion, Idigna presided over marshes and canals, guiding fish and birds and comforting travelers in soggy lands. Mainstream scholarship dates the worship of Idigna back to the early dynastic period, around 2900 BCE, when expanding irrigation networks turned once dry fields into an ever-flowing world of channels and basins. You can almost see the priests waiting alongside you, carrying clay chalices filled with date wine as offerings to ensure safe passage. A dry laugh escapes your lips. You're so soaked you could just as well be dripping wine instead of water. But jokes aside, these marshes were arteries of Sumerian agriculture, the lifeblood of fields that fed Uruk, Uar, and Lagash. Canals like the Ninma Canal are documented in administrative tablets, carrying water hundreds of kilometers from principal rivers into parched fields. You imagine the grunt of workers cutting banks with spades, the clang of bronze tools stacking bundles of reeds. Historians still debate how early Sumerians engineered these canals. Some argue they used simple wooden sluice gates. Others propose they built complex stone-lined channels far earlier than once believed. As you continue, a sudden flicker of movement catches your eye. A waterfowl rising from beneath a blanket of duckweed, its wings beating slow and deliberate. In its wake, circles expand across the surface like concentric echoes. Obscure naturalists have noted that certain duckweed varieties abscond with minute traces of bronze in their tissues, suggesting that bits of metal from ancient slag seeped into these waters long ago. Whether those plants now hold microscopic bronze fragments is a question few scholars have pursued. But you like the idea that the marsh itself might store metallic memories of Aratta's forges. You skirt an open pool where the reeds part to reveal an ancient pathway paved with rough-hewn slabs. This causeway, half submerged and slick with algae, must once have connected a riverside quay to temple precincts. Mainstream archaeologists uncovered such causeways at sites like Eridu, noting they often bore post holes for wooden railings. You step onto the stones, feeling them give slightly under your weight, a sign that centuries of silt have softened their edges. Somewhere beneath, experts believe, lies the foundation of Aratta's own quayside, where goods arrived on reed barges bound for the city's bronze workshops. Your torchlight, exchanged now for a palm-held clay lamp scented with sesame oil, casts dancing shadows on a partially exposed carved relief. You crouch to study shallow grooves forming a series of conjoined fish, stylized in the Sumerian glyph for abundance. The glyph is plain in textbooks, but here, carved life-size, it feels vibrant, as though the marsh itself is offering you a coded message. Obscure epigraphers once claimed these reliefs marked sacrificial sites where fish offerings flowed instead of wine, but mainstream consensus rejects that notion. They insist these were decorative motifs signifying prosperity. Historians are still debating whether abundance glyphs served purely symbolic functions or indicated actual fish harvesting zones. A sudden rustle to your right makes you spin, only to see a line of tiny footprints in the mud. You follow them, heart thumping, until they lead to a broken shard of a ceramic jar. The shard bears a faint painted image, a reed boat with high prows and a mast supporting a square sail. You trace your finger over faded ochre lines, imagining seamstresses weaving sails from linen spun by Aratta's outlying villages. Maritime historians note that Sumerians used square sails as early as 3500 BCE, though the precise rigging methods remain uncertain. A fringe theory suggests they twisted ropes made of palm fiber into a kind of pulley system, but evidence is scant. Scholars are still arguing about how they controlled those early sails in shifting marsh breezes. Sloshing onward, you come to a grove of poplar and tamarisk trees. Their roots entwine in shallow muddy banks, and their trunks bear notches where ancient scaffoldings may once have leaned. You imagine temple artisans erecting wooden beams to paint wall murals or hang bronze reliefs, scenes of mythic hunts and divine assemblies. Color traces sometimes survive on brick faces in major sites, but here, only ghostly swirls of pigment cling to porous stone. An obscure pigment analysis from a 1970s excavation claimed traces of cinnabar mixed with ochre, hinting at Aratta's possible trade in mercury ores, yet many specialists dismiss the finding as contamination. Historians are still debating whether cinnabar reached Sumer via Aratta's networks or through entirely different channels. Distant thunder rumbles, though skies are clear, a reminder that weather in these flat plains can be capricious. Seasonal storms could swell canals overnight, turning pathways into rivers and carving new channels through fields. You recall that the Sumerian term for flood, udq6, literally means water that sweeps away, and appears in countless texts warning of divine wrath. Yet that term may encompass everything from gentle high water that fertilized soils to cataclysmic overflows that wiped out small settlements. The precise nature of these floods remains disputed. Scholars are still debating whether mythic floods reflect single extraordinary events or a series of recurring inundations gradually woven into epic lore. You push on to where birds will overhead egrets skim low, plucking fiddler crabs from exposed mudflats. For a moment you feel voyeuristic, as if you've intruded on a hidden performance. A local reed cutter once told you that these mudflats were haunted by creatures half fish, half man. Primitive warnings scribbled in the margins of some tablet. Your rational mind laughs. No Sumerian text seriously describes merfolk in these marshes. Yet folklore thrives in shadows, and an obscure anecdote in a later Babylonian commentary hints at marsh-dwelling spirits that guarded ancient watercourses. Whether there's truth behind the tale or it's purely allegorical remains a matter of lively academic debate. You navigate around a collapsed brick arch, the remains of a low bridge across a side channel. The bricks, made of sun-dried clay mixed with chaff, still bear impressions of reed mats used as drying racks. Each brick is stamped with a maker's sign, sometimes a simple pictograph, a stylized wave or a goat's head. Obscure sign lists from the 1920s catalog dozens of these stamps, speculating they marked jurisdictional boundaries as well as kiln origins. Modern reassessments challenge that view. Some propose they were quality seals, ensuring builders recognized reputable kilns. Historians are still debating the social meaning of these brick stamps. Reeds shift ahead, revealing a small mound ringed by broken pottery shards. You wade into the tangle and kneel to scoop up fragments. Some are fine ware with intricate repoussé designs, circles within circles, trifurcate leaves, even tiny rosettes. You hold one under your lamp, marveling at the precision. These fragments match where found at major southern sites, suggesting a shared artistic tradition or active exchange. A niche ceramicologist once argued that Aratta specialized in a high-firing technique that gave pottery a metallic sheen, but mainstream scholars urge caution, noting such effects can arise from simple clay composition and firing atmospheres. A bullfrog croaks nearby, low and insistent, pulling you from contemplation. You stand and realize the sun is now higher, warming reeds to a gentle sizzle. Damp breezes carry the faint scent of decaying vegetation, rich, fertile, and a little pungent. Ideal for artichoke and onion, you joke to yourself, though neither grew here in antiquity. But you pause at that thought. Archaeobotanists have found charred onion seeds in some Sumerian hearths, indicating culinary use by 2500 BCE. Whether Aratta's kitchens simmered onion broths remains unknown, though it's a delightful image. You skirt a shallow pool where the sun reflects off tiny ripples, illuminating the underside of floating reeds. Each reed casts a spiderweb network of shadows on the silt below, making patterns that remind you of interlocking cuneiform signs. You kneel to peer into the water, spotting a half-buried ingot of copper, its edges rounded by time. Copper nodules from the Iranian plateau were prized in Mesopotamia, and traders often left sample pieces as proof of quality. You lift it and feel its weight, a cool, dense reminder that metals once flowed through these wetlands as freely as water. You press on toward a distant rise, a barely noticeable swell above the flatness. It may once have been an island site where people escaped floodwaters, erecting small homesteads above the marsh. Many Sumerian cities have tells, artificial. You clutch the chipped clay tablet as you step out from beneath the canyon's shadow, the fresh morning air carrying grit and promise. The tapering edges of the tablet bear the name En-mer-kar and Aratta, carved in precise wedges. Witnesses to a mission that bound two cities in bronze and ambition. Without pausing to examine its provenance, you tuck the tablet into your leather satchel and press onward, heart thrumming like a smith's hammer on anvil. Your path threads between jagged limestone outcrops, where sunlight drips down in gold ribbons. Below, the valley floor yawns, a ribbon of dusty track carved by countless donkeys bearing copper ingots from the Zagros Mountains. Mainstream records note these mountain veins supplied Mesopotamia's earliest bronze smiths, a trade network flourishing by 2600 BCE. You step carefully over flint flakes discarded by prehistoric hunters, imagining that long ago, nomads paused here to fashion arrowheads under identical suns. As the canyon widens, wind whistles through twin pinnacles, sculpting eerie tunes that cradle you in their echo. A single syllable drifts, Aratta. It could be your imagination, or the very winds chanting the city's name, as obscure desert legends whisper. Scholars still debate whether such desert murmurs were once ritualized by Sumerian priests or mere later romantic invention. You catch yourself smiling at the thought. A secret passage where the elements speak out the destinies of kings. Midday looms, and dust swirls in eddies around your ankles. You pause at a rocky cleft to pull forth your water skin, leather coarse against your palm. As you sip, a tiny gecko darts across sun-baked stone, its mottled skin the color of sun-faded reeds. In a flash of scholarly trivia, you recall a minor excavation at Tel Brak uncovered gecko amulets, suggesting Sumerians revered them as guardians of thresholds. Whether those amulets originated in Aratta or were borrowed from older Syrian traditions is still argued in dusty journals. Resuming the trail, you round a bend and spy the gate of Coppershine ahead, a natural arch sculpted by centuries of winds. Bronze-tinged mineral veins streak its walls, catching sunlight like sparks. The epic describes this threshold as enchanted. Only the true envoy of Uruk may pass unharmed. You lay a palm against the cool stone, feeling tiny tremors from deep within the earth. Geological surveys confirm seismic activity here, offering a plausible kernel for the mythic tests of rock and quake. Historians are still debating whether the epic's trials symbolize real mountain tremors or moral challenges crafted by court poets. Passing beneath the arch, you descend into a narrow ravine. Dripstones hang like stalactites, and the faint trickle of water strikes the floor, an oasis at the canyon's heart. You kneel to taste the water, mineral-rich, slightly metallic, as though soothed by copper traces. Obscure field chemists once speculated that rivers in this region carried dissolved copper from distant mountain ores. If true, these waters might have lent the epic its vivid associations between Aratta and bronze. Yet many scholars dismiss those chemical studies as overinterpreting incidental readings. The debate persists. You emerge onto a sloping plateau where tufts of dry grass cling to cracked earth. In the distance, beyond a final ridge, the first haze of Aratta's adobe walls shimmers. But before that vision crystallizes, you navigate a labyrinth of low trenches, remnants of ancient canal trials, perhaps test ditches dug by Aratta's engineers. Sumerian tablet fragments mention experimental canals designed to divert floodwaters, a blueprint for managing irrigation. Most specialists agree these references map to southern marsh projects, but fringe thinkers propose they point to early hydraulic feats in Aratta itself. Historians are still discussing which city pioneered those designs. Sunset greets you atop a wind-scoured knoll. You pour oil into your clay lamp and ignite its wick, the small flame dancing against a sky awash in rose and violet. Below, you see patterns of fields etched in earth, rectilinear parcels irrigated by sidelong channels. The epic lauds Aratta's fields as bronze-lined furrows. But that may be poetic flourish. Soil would crack under actual metal. You click your tongue at the image, picturing gleaming bronze plows cutting swaths through furrows. In reality, heavy bronze tools were rare. Most plows stayed wood-handled with metal tips. Archaeological digs confirm occasional bronze share tips, but nothing to justify entire plows. Scholarly arguments for bronze-lined fields remain firmly in the realm of metaphor, though some historians still debate their symbolic meaning. Night deepens, and you unsling your satchel to prepare a makeshift camp. You arrange flat stones as hearth, pile dead brush, and kindle a modest blaze. Pulling out barley cakes and dried dates, you feast under a canopy of unfamiliar stars. Sumerian stargazers charted constellations that guided travelers, though their zodiac bears little resemblance to ours. One obscure astronomical tablet lists a star of Aratta, whose position allegedly foretold war or peace. Mainstream astronomy rejects that as astrological fiction, but the tablet survives in fragments. Whether it refers to an actual stellar observation or courtly propaganda remains debated. By the firelight, you inspect the tablet again, its text demanding tribute for En-mer-kar's new temple. Your role is simple: deliver these words, then return. Yet beneath simplicity lurks peril. Aratta's ruler, the elusive lord of the copper throne, might challenge you, sending you back to Uruk in disgrace or worse. The epic warns of magical defenses: walls inscribed with charms that render intruders mute, or guard dogs of uncanny size. You scoff at those fancies, until a distant bark echoes across the plateau. Your heart jolts. No dog should be this deep in the hills, and certainly none of such weighty tone. Maybe there's truth in myth after all. You rise, lamp in one hand, tablet in the other, and tread toward the glowing walls that now stand clear against the horizon. Rust-red bricks laid in mud mortar form battlements crowned by niches, likely for statues of deities. You recall that Sumerians believed cities possessed tutelary gods whose images guarded gates. Obscure ritual texts mention Aratta's own pair of guardian idols, life-sized bronze lions whose roar was said to shake the earth. No fragment of those lions has been found, but ruler lists cite their commissioning by a legendary king. Whether those lions existed or lived solely in epic imagination remains a hotly contested question among archaeologists. Standing at Aratta's gate, you call out in Sumerian, "Messenger of Uruk, bearer of your lord's command." The heavy gates creak open before you, wheeled on leather-tied axles, a rare technology mentioned in administrative archives. Recent experiments confirm that axles lubricated with date palm oil can support massive doors, but evidence of such systems in the archaeological record is scant. Historians are still debating how widespread wheeled gates were in the mid-3rd millennium BCE. A hush greets you as you step inside. Bronze torches, simple copper sconces hammered into wall brackets, gleam dimly along broad avenues paved with packed earth. Figures in flowing robes emerge. Priests with braided hair, attendants balancing baskets of lapis lazuli. You meet the gaze of Aratta's ruler, a tall figure draped in embroidered wool, eyes flicking to the tablet. He tilts his head, and in a voice like smelted metal, he intones, "Uruk's demands are bold. Let us see what our bronze can offer." You extend the tablet, the witness of two civilizations poised in your hands. Conversation unfolds. The ruler's envoy counters En-mer-kar's tribute list with offers of rare copper, beetle's wing inlay, and carved gem seals. The two sides weigh value, lavish gifts that cement ties or challenge hegemony. You listen, aware that diplomacy can hinge on a single misplaced symbol. A small miswriting, a wedge turned the wrong way, could mean tribute instead of refuse. Obscure scribal manuals warn students of such traps, but few copies survive. Scholars still argue how often deliberate wordplay shaped Sumerian politics. At dawn's first glow, a treaty is sealed. Aratta pledges fine copper and lapis for Uruk's temple, in exchange for grain and olive oil from southern plains. You witness hands clasp, tablet impressions marking the pact. With that, your mission ends. You lift the tablet, now inked with mud and sweat, and turn westward toward the gate of copper shine. The canyon awaits you once more, its trials behind, the promise of return singing in your mind like hammer on bronze. As you fade down the trail, the city's walls recede, but the memory endures in each footprint. You carry not only clay and code but the pulse of two worlds intertwined. Historians are still debating whether this epic reflects genuine events or served purely as royal propaganda. Yet for you, the journey was undeniably real. Bronze, sand, and wind weaving in your... You glance back at the city walls one last time, the treaty secured in your satchel, and then slip through a side gate into Aratta's famed artisan quarter. Narrow lanes paved with beaten earth wind between low workshops built of sun-dried bricks. Each doorway bears a simple carved emblem, a circle bisected by 3 radiating lines, marking the residence of a bronze smith. A sudden waft of heat and smoke curls around your ankles, drawing you deeper into a labyrinth of forges and anvils. As you round a corner, you step into a cavernous hall where a row of charcoal-fired furnaces glows like embers scattered across the ground. The air thrums with the hum of bellows and the clang of metal on stone. You feel the heat rise, pressing against your skin until each breath tastes faintly of bronze. Mainstream archaeological surveys date the emergence of such workshops in southern Mesopotamia to around 3000 BCE, when urban demand for tools and vessels spurred advances in metalworking technology. A master smith stands before a domed furnace, stirring molten metal with a long iron rod. Copper ore, smelted with charcoal and crushed or flux, pools like liquid sunset at his feet. You lean forward to catch every detail. The smith's leather apron, scored with burn marks. The rhythmic puff of goatskin bellows exhaling life into the fire. The hiss as small copper droplets hit water to form rough ingots. Obscure experimental reconstructions suggest Sumerian craftsmen sometimes added crushed sea salt to their furnaces, hypothesizing it improved or reduction, though evidence for that practice remains scant. You step to a workbench where apprentices file and hammer blank discs of cooled bronze. Their small hammers ping in rapid succession, a staccato chorus echoing off mud brick walls. You run your fingers along a half-finished bowl, feeling the fine concentric grooves left by a turning lathe. Lathe-turned vessels are known from slightly later periods, but some scholars argue Aratta may have pioneered rudimentary versions using yoke-driven poles. Historians are still debating whether such early turning devices existed in 3 RD millennium BCE Sumer, or if later artisans retrojected their own inventions onto earlier narratives. Further down the lane, you approach a sheltered courtyard where master artisans assemble decorative friezes. Sheets of bronze, hammered thin as parchment, shimmer in torchlight. Each sheet bears stamped motifs. Stylized goats trampling flowering vines, winged lions guarding shrines, concentric rosettes symbolizing the sun. You lift a corner, admiring its delicacy. It's so thin that, pressed between your palm and thumb, it bends like young reed. A little-known fact, some Sumerian workshops fashioned warshields by laminating multiple bronze sheets over a woven reed core, combining flexibility and strength in a single, lightweight design. A murmur drifts through the courtyard. Priests have arrived to bless a new offering. You step aside as 2 robed figures carry a bronze statuette of Inanna, an 8-headed lion crowned with stars, toward a makeshift altar. The statuette gleams as though alive, each surface polished to mirror shine. Offerings of date wine and grain are poured over its feet in a ritual to grant divine protection to the craftspeople. Cuneiform liturgies record such ceremonies in major temples of Uruk, but obscure temple inventories hint that Aratta maintained its own shrine to Inanna within the artisan quarter. You follow a narrow passage into a shadowed room where alloy recipes are inscribed on clay tablets. Here, scribes record precise proportions. Take 4 parts copper, 1 part cassiterite, roasted and pounded fine. Mix with crushed copper arsenic or smelt until fire's tongue runs white. Such detailed metallurgical instructions are rare in the archaeological record, with most surviving in later Babylonian compilations. Scholars debate whether these recipes reflect actual practice or idealized standards, noting that variance in or quality would have forced smiths to improvise on the fly. Historians are still debating whether Aratta's artisans adhered strictly to written recipes or relied primarily on oral tradition and hands-on experience. Stepping out, you encounter a row of bellows valves carved into stone walls. Simple leather flaps that open and close with a smith's foot. A single apprentice demonstrates, stamping a wooden pedal to force air into a clay-lined furnace. Each exhalation intensifies the heat, driving the molten metal to a liquid state. Most Sumerian workshops used double-chambered bellows, yet obscure references in a 2nd millennium BCE treatise suggest a triple-chamber design was tested in Aratta. Whether that design proved practical or remained a curious footnote remains unresolved in metallurgical studies. In the far corner of the quarter, you find a long bench where enamelers in fine robes fill recessed bronze plaques with crushed glass pigments. The colors, deep blues, fiery reds, and rich greens, glint in the flickering torchlight. Oblong earrings, pectoral inlays, and weapon hilts take shape, destined for nobles or temple idols. A quirky tidbit: one fragmentary inscription boasts of dragon-scale enamel brighter than dawn, though no dragon-scale technique is documented elsewhere. Scholars suspect this is poetic license or a mistranslation of serpent scale. But the debate rages on. Your steps lead you to a sunlit courtyard where large ingots of newly poured bronze lie to cool on stone slabs. Apprentices sprinkle cold water in a fine mist, creating a muted hiss as temperatures drop. You lean close to examine one ingot's surface, tracing the telltale swirl patterns of a bismuth-rich bronze alloy, an uncommon variant that hardens more quickly but also becomes brittle. Most Sumerians worked with simple copper tin or copper arsenic alloys. This bismuth blend is mentioned only in a brief Akkadian glossary. Historians are still debating whether Aratta's artisans discovered this alloy independently or sourced it from distant mountain tribes. Nearby, a scholar in linen robes measures slag heaps piled high outside an open-air smelting pit. The slag's glassy texture and greenish hue reveal traces of copper silicate, implying clay lining in the furnace reacted with molten metal. Contemporary archaeometallurgists use portable X-ray fluorescence to analyze such slag in situ, but ancient Sumerians had only fire and water to probe their byproducts. A little-known excursion report from the 1930s notes that local villagers still call these slag mounds Metal Mountain, believing they are enchanted leftovers from an age of bronze giants. You notice a group of journeyman smiths gathered around a partially assembled chariot wheel. Bronze fittings and lug collars wait to be hammered into place. The Sumerian chariot appears in texts by 2500 BCE, yet some obscure pictographs hint at wheeled vehicles a century earlier. Historians are still debating whether those symbols represent true chariots or simple wagons without spoked wheels. In Aratta, the debate takes on new weight. If the city pioneered bronze-reinforced wheels, it could rewrite our understanding of early transport technology. Turning a corner, you catch sight of an immense closed doorway sealed with a massive bronze bolt. Behind it lies the smith's inner sanctum, where the rarest metals are alloyed. Only master artisans are permitted inside. Apprentices whisper tales of mysterious glows and the crackle of metal sparks like distant lightning. You imagine crossing the threshold, stepping into a world where bronze flows like water, then hardens into shapes that hold the power of kings. A sudden bark interrupts your reverie. A guard hound strays close, drawn by the scent of hot metal. It retreats at a sharp command from a sentinel in a dyed wool tunic. Guards in Aratta wear bronze-reinforced leather armor, reinforcing vital points with riveted plates. Archaeological finds from contemporary sites include scattered plates and rivets, but complete sets remain elusive. Some write that Aratta's armorers created full bronze cuirasses. Others dismiss these accounts as epic exaggeration. Historians are still debating the true extent of Aratta's military metallurgical skills. You circle back to the forging hall, following the steady pulse of hammering. A corridor lined with skull-shaped molds catches your eye, intended for ritual vessels used in sacred ceremonies. You pause to touch one mold's smooth interior, embossed with the visage of a horned deity. This type of mold appears only rarely in the archaeological record, primarily in funeral contexts. Obscure scholars propose such vessels held consecrated oils, while others view them as ceremonial doorstop guardians. The argument remains lively without consensus. At the heart of the quarter stands the great anvil, a single slab of basalt, scorched black and scarred with countless hammer marks. All master smiths here lay their work upon it to test its resonance. You rap it gently with a small bronze rod. The sound rings clear and pure, like a tuning fork. That clarity was prized. A good anvil could reveal flaws in an alloy by the tone it produced. Such acoustic testing is noted in later metallurgical texts, but whether Sumerians employed this technique is still debated among historians. Your feet ache from standing, and you step into a shaded alcove where artisans rest on stone benches. They wipe sweat from their brows with pieces of linen, then sip water flavored with dates. You step off the beaten path and onto the broad plain where earth and water have danced for millennia. Beneath your sandals, the sun-baked clay gives way to soft silts, each layer a record of seasons long past. A low, rhythmic tremor hums through the ground, as if the land itself exhales. You plant your foot firmly and feel the vibration ripple up your leg. In this cradle of civilization, every quake and flood has reshaped the very soil you tread. Mainstream geology dates the formation of the Mesopotamian alluvial plain to sediment deposits from the Tigris and Euphrates between 6000 and 3000 BCE, piling nutrients in fan-shaped deltas that fed Uruk, Uar, and their neighbors. A gentle breeze lifts wisps of dust around you, carrying a faint odor of wet clay. You crouch, digging a fingertip into the earth to reveal fine, pale lines of silt. These layers mark distinct flood events, annual inundations that farmers once greeted with both fear and gratitude. Administrative tablets from Lagash record detailed flood records, noting water heights and dates for planting, a level of record-keeping unmatched in other ancient cultures. Yet here, no tablets survive, only the layered earth speaking in silent code. You lean closer, scanning for microscopic clues. Tiny, hollow shards catch your eye. Diatom frustules, the silica shells of single-celled algae. Obscure sedimentologists discovered these microfossils in core samples from southern marshlands, noting that certain species thrive only in brackish, slowly shifting waters. The presence of Fragillaria and Navicula suggests salinity fluctuations tied to seasonal flooding, a subtle chemical fingerprint of ancient deluges. Few scholars have pursued these diatoms in Sumerian contexts, but they offer a promising window into how flood pulses varied in intensity over centuries. Standing, you track a shallow channel winding through the plain. This defunct river course curves like a faded ribbon, its banks lined with sedges and tamarisk. The channel's sediment is coarser, grains of sand and small pebbles that whisper of stronger currents. Mainstream archaeologists confirm that major rivers in antiquity frequently shifted course, left to their own devices by silt buildup and tectonic tilting. Occasionally, the Euphrates would abandon one channel, carving a new path meters away, leaving behind fertile yet unpredictable farmland. You notice embedded in the mud a tiny fossilized fish vertebra, a fragile bone from a freshwater tilapia. Such remains often surface in flood deposits, but here it lies alone, suggesting a sudden inundation rather than gradual pond formation. A little-known discovery in the 1990s found similar fish bones interspersed with ancient pottery shards near Eridu, hinting at a catastrophic flood event around 2600 BCE. Whether that flood inspired the Gilgamesh myth or was simply one of many remains under scholarly debate. A faint rumble grows beneath your feet and you crouch as the ground tilts imperceptibly. Earth tremors in southern Mesopotamia are mostly slight, minor jolts from distant fault lines, but they leave their mark in cracked mudbrick walls and displaced channels. Obscure seismologists argue that an earthquake around 2900 BCE caused a rapid river avulsion that inundated nearby settlements. Mainstream consensus, however, attributes most channel shifts to sediment-driven course changes, not tectonic upheaval. Historians are still debating the relative influence of seismic versus hydrological forces in shaping early urban landscapes. You continue across a sun-browned field where the surface glitters with tiny fragments of mica and quartz. These mineral flecks, washed down from upland sources, settled during high-energy floods. A niche peat core study located several such layers, each corresponding to a major flooding pulse roughly every 2 decades. The wet years left thick, clay-rich deposits, while drier intervals revealed dark organic films. Together, they form a pseudo-annual calendar etched in soil, waiting for someone to read it. Archaeologists seldom incorporate peat analyses in Mesopotamian surveys, yet they hold untapped potential. Up ahead, a low embankment rises, a hand-built levee designed to hold back floodwaters. The top layer is coarse sand, intentionally laid to absorb wave impact, while the core is mixed mud and chopped straw. Sumerian administrative texts describe construction of such dikes to protect granaries and temples. Mainstream studies suggest large labor forces, sometimes thousands of workers, were mobilized for these irrigation projects. Yet some researchers argue smaller communities could have built effective levees using simple tools, reducing the need for central authority. Historians are still debating the social organization behind Mesopotamian hydraulic works. You follow the levee's crest, each step revealing new impressions in the clay. Will ruts from donkey carts hauling earth, footprints frozen in time. You pause at a shallow ditch cut parallel to the embankment. This relief channel drained excess water during floods, guiding it back to the main river. A fringe interpretation posits that such canal trials were early tests for large-scale irrigation, but mainstream archaeology usually attributes these to reactive flood control rather than planned agriculture. That argument remains unresolved in specialist journals. As you skirt a broken section of the levee, you discover charred reed bundles mixed with clay. These bundles likely served as riprap to slow erosion, a method still used in modern riverbank stabilization. Obscure fiber analysis confirms that the reeds came from stands dozens of kilometers away, indicating supply networks dedicated to hydraulic maintenance. Historians are still debating whether such material logistics were coordinated by temple bureaucracies or informal market exchanges. The plain slopes gently toward a wide basin now occupied by shallow pools and mudflats. Salt-tolerant plants cling to sun-cracked soil, their roots a living network anchoring the banks. You kneel to examine an exposed root ball encrusted with salt crystals, evidence of seasonal evaporation leaving behind mineral efflorescence. Paleoethnobotanists have found similar salt layers near around 2400 BCE, noting that salinization eventually degraded fields, forcing settlements to move. Whether this phenomenon accelerated Aratta's decline is still contested by scholars. You rise and trudge onward, water seeping into your boots where the levee dips. The channel here is deeper, carved by successive floods. You spot a half-buried ceramic jar perched on a ledge of coarse sand. Its rim is chipped, its body encrusted with silt, but painted fragments of a geometric pattern remain visible. Pottery specialists link that pattern to Uruk's late Uruk period, circa 3200 BCE, suggesting the jar was buried by an early flood. Such datable artifacts help construct a timeline of inundations that pulse through the earth like a hidden heartbeat. A subtle cracking sound draws your attention downward to the levee's interior face, where mud brick remains emerge in a stepped pattern. You crouch and brush away loose sediment, revealing the outlines of ancient bricks. This core flood interaction hints at levee breaches that forced emergency repairs, recorded in administrative texts as temple works. Mainstream historians see these repairs as evidence of centralized authority maintaining vital infrastructure. Others argue that local households pooled labor communally, with minimal top-down oversight. Historians are still debating the locus of power in hydraulic societies. You wander off the levee onto damp ground, each step leaving a clear print. The clay smells sweet, almost perfumed by organic decay. In the murk, you glimpse a small spadefoot toad, its skin mottled like the cracked earth. A quirky fact, some modern herpetologists suggest spadefoots can detect approaching rainfall through substrate vibrations, an ability that would have allowed amphibians to anticipate floods. Whether Sumerian farmers noted such behavior and saw the toads as rain omens remains unrecorded. Yet it's a tantalizing thought. A distant rumble invites you to raise your head. Black clouds roll in from the west, heavy with promise. Rain in these plains can come in sudden torrents, swelling channels and bursting levees. You dash to a nearby mound for shelter, pressing your back against a sun-hardened dome of mud brick. Lightning arches across the sky, followed by a crash that shakes the ground. A bolt has struck not far off, splitting a date palm at its crown. The smell of ozone mingles with hot earth, a visceral reminder of nature's power. The first raindrops sizzle as they hit the dry clay, sending up steam and soft puffs of dust. You close your eyes and let the storm wash over you, grounding each breath in the sound of water drumming on mud. In this moment, you understand why the Sumerians worshipped storm gods like Enlil and Adad, both creator and destroyer, his reign measured in tremors and torrents. Yet the epic flood myth likely conflates many such storms into a single cataclysm. Historians are still debating whether that myth refers to a distinct event or an accumulation of seasonal calamities. When the rain subsides, you emerge into a world transformed. Shallow rivulets braid the plain, carving new miniature channels. Each trickle carries sediment down. You push off from the levee's edge, leaving behind the damp whisper of mud and floodwater, and step onto a sun-baked track that has guided traders for centuries. The air is hot and still, carrying a faint dust haze that softens distant shapes into watercolor washes. To your left, a low ridge of compressed silt marks the ancient boundary of the floodplain. To your right, tufts of wild barley sway over pale clay. This path is one of Mesopotamia's great arteries, a winding ribbon of trade that once linked city-states like Uruk and Lagash to the farthest reaches of the Zagros foothills. As you set one foot before the other, you notice the compacted earth is studded with small, dark pebbles. Slag from spilled copper, perhaps, or way stations where smiths tested ingots for purity. By around 3000 BCE, Sumerian scribes were already recording shipments of copper and lapis lazuli in administrative tablets, ensuring each consignment reached its intended destination. Lapis lazuli, prized for its vivid blue, came all the way from the Badakhshan mines in northeastern Afghanistan, traveling over 1,500 miles through treacherous mountain passes and desert plains before arriving in Sumerian workshops. This epic trade is one of the earliest examples of long-distance exchange in human history. You lead a caravan of 10 donkeys, each laden with rectangular copper ingots hammered flat and marked with the seal of your merchant house. A single animal wears a brass bell around its neck, meant to ward off evil spirits as you journey. This quirky practice, caravan bells carved in the shape of leaping goats, has been noted only in a handful of excavation reports, suggesting traders believed the clinking sound would confuse desert jinn. Historians are still debating whether such charms were widespread superstition or a marketing ploy to reassure clients of a load's authenticity. At midday, the heat ripples the horizon like a mirage, and you pause at the remains of an abandoned caravanserai. Low stone walls form quadrangular pens where animals once sheltered, and a central hall still bears the faint outline of clay benches where merchants rested and bartered. Here, caravans from the north might trade copper for horses from Anatolia, while those from the east offered lapis in exchange for fine textiles or olive oil. Some obscure travelers' tales claim these stops also featured basic baths fed by small wells, luxuries in this arid land, though no physical evidence of such baths has yet been found. Scholars remain divided on whether Sumerian caravanserais ever included bathing facilities or if these stories reflect later Greco-Roman influences projected onto an earlier era. You resume your march, following the track as it curves toward a narrow pass where the earth rises into low hills. The path contracts and each donkey steps carefully over rocky slabs. A sudden gust rattles loose stones down the slope. You startle, imagining the roar of an avalanche. Local guides once carved simple waymarks, small pecked symbols of a reed or a goat, on protruding rocks to reassure traders they remained on course. These marks persist today in faint, weather-worn outlines, but their original meanings have sparked fierce academic debate. Were they official boundary markers erected by temple authorities, or informal signs left by itinerant merchants forging their own way? Historians are still debating the origins and functions of these primitive road signs. Emerging from the pass, you find yourself on a broad plateau bisected by a dried streambed. The bed's coarse sand and pebbles hint at occasional flash floods, and you choose your steps carefully to avoid slipping. Beneath your foot, a shard of pottery glints, fine ware painted with concentric circles in dark red slip. Such ceramics are associated with the late Uruk period, around 3200 BCE, indicating that farmers here once offered wine and bread to river gods before setting out on their journeys. You pocket the shard as a keepsake, imagining ancient rituals pairing libations with prayer for safe passage. A gentle breeze carries the faint scent of juniper and sage from shrubs dotting the plateau. You crouch to examine a small amphora shard fashioned from terracotta so porous you can see daylight through its wall. Amphorae of this type were used to carry oils, perhaps sesame or poppy seed, used by merchants to lube wagon axles. Obscure metallurgical experiments suggest that Sumerians mixed sesame oil with fine sand to create a crude abrasive paste for polishing bronze, hinting at a surprising synergy between trade goods. Whether sesame sand paste was widely used or confined to elite workshops remains unclear. The discussion continues in specialist journals. By late afternoon, you approach a way station perched on a low knoll, a cluster of mud brick buildings whose higher walls still hold shadows. A lone guard stands by a battered gate, clad in leather jerkins studded with small bronze rounds. His role is to collect tolls, a fraction of every load passing through this territory. You hand over a clay tablet bearing your official permit, impressed with the seal of Uruk's governor. The guard scrutinizes it, then nods and returns the tablet with a curt salute. Toll stations like this appear in several Neo-Sumerian administrative lists, suggesting organized control of these arteries by temple or palace bureaucracies. Inside the station's courtyard, merchants from distant lands recline on low benches, exchanging news and goods. A cohort of traders from Magan, the land of copper, likely modern Oman, display rough-hewn copper chunks encrusted with gypsum. Another group haggles over thin ingots of electrum, a gold-silver alloy shimmering like pale dawn. You overhear talk of tin arriving from as far west as Anatolia and tin scarcity driving up bronze production costs in cities thirsty for weapons and tools. This global jigsaw of materials underscores the era's remarkable interconnectedness. As dusk beckons, you set out camp beside a shallow well lined with chipped ceramics. You and your fellow merchants string a tarp between two posts to catch evening dew for washing. Tucking into a dinner of barley porridge and dried dates, you survey your wares: copper, electrum filaments, beads of lapis lazuli, and woven textiles destined for the high temple of Inanna in Uruk. The lapis beads glow in the lantern's amber light, each polished surface reflecting a sapphire sky. Luxurious and sacred, this stone was believed to hold the essence of the heavens, a mainstream belief echoed in countless Sumerian hymns. Soon, you unroll a ceramic tablet to record today's inventory: 20 copper ingots, 8 small lapis beads, 2 rolls of dyed woolen cloth. Scribes keep meticulous counts, noting weight in minas and shekels. You make special note of a solitary cylinder seal depicting a winged bull, a rare motif thought to invoke the protection of Ninurta, god of war and agriculture. Obscure iconographic studies suggest that only certain merchant families used animal hybrid beasts on their seals to advertise both strength and fertility. Whether this practice dates back to Aratta's traders or emerged later in Akkadian times remains under scrutiny among epigraphers. Above you, stars prickle the deepening sky. Orion's belt stands sentinel, guiding travelers who follow its rising each winter. Caravans synchronized their departures with stellar risings to avoid midday heat and desert storms. Yet not all relied on stars alone. Some desert nomads used milestones carved into rocky promontories, each marked with tally marks counting the nights until the next oasis. Scholars debate how widespread these navigational aids were, and whether they predate Sumer's earliest expeditions or represent a later innovation borrowed from Arabian tribes. As you lie beneath your simple canopy, the crackle of distant campfires echoes along the corridor of dunes and ridges. You drift toward sleep, imagining the next day's walk, crossing a seasonal wadi, descending toward a low valley where reeds once rustled in forgotten swamps, and finally reaching the outskirts of Uruk, where Aratta's copper and lapis will find their final home. Tomorrow, you will unload your precious cargo, presenting it to temple treasurers whose records will immortalize every ingot and bead. In the hush before dawn, you consider the paths you've walked, these ancient arteries carved by centuries of commerce, blood, and prayer. Traders warped the land as much as floods did, digging canals, building causeways, and leaving behind more than footprints. A web of human connection that transformed scattered settlements. You awaken before dawn in the cool hush of Aratta's administrative hall, where clay tablets rest in neat stacks on low wooden shelves. The air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and sesame oil from the lamp flickering beside you. You rise on aching legs, wrap a strip of linen around your wrist to wipe across the small of your back, and step toward a long stone table carved with shallow grooves for rolling clay. Here, you'll meet the seals that once authenticated alliances, trades, and sacred oaths, tiny cylinders of stone or metal that leave echoes of their owners in soft impressions. You pick up the first cylinder seal, a polished band of carnelian, its surface warm from centuries of handling. Pressing it into fresh clay yields a continuous scene of wrestlers locked in combat, their muscles tensed, hair braided in tight coils. Mainstream scholars date the earliest cylinder seals to around 3500 BCE in Uruk, where they evolved from simple tokens to complex narrative devices. Seals served as personal signatures, rolling across tablets to mark possession or approval. Without these little cylinders, the Sumerian world's bureaucracy would have collapsed under its own weight. Leaning close, you run your fingertip along the recessed grooves. You notice tiny striations, evidence that the artisan carved with a fine bronze burin rather than the more common flint tool. Obscure metallurgical experiments show that bronze burins left distinctive microscopic marks, clues that help modern archaeologists attribute seals to specific workshops. While most seals were mass-produced by skilled artisans, a handful bear the hallmarks of experimental techniques, hinting at metalworkers' curiosity about their own craft. Next, you handle a seal of mottled steatite inlaid with shell, a gift from the merchants of Magan. Rolling it across a wet clay tablet reveals a procession of reed boats, lotus flowers, and a sun disk flanked by 2 goats. You imagine that this seal belonged to a maritime trader, encoding messages about cargoes bound for Uruk's canals. Scholars still debate whether scenes on such seals conveyed literal transactions or served primarily symbolic and protective functions, warding off theft through divine iconography. You unroll a fresh slab of clay and insert a small wooden frame to guide the seal's impression. The seal glides smoothly, leaving a perfect repetition of arches, horned creatures, and river waves. A whisper of pride runs through you as you imagine ancient scribes copying the same pattern to validate shipments of copper and lapis. Some obscure texts mention seals that included hidden inscriptions, tiny cuneiform signs only legible when angled toward torchlight. Whether those secret notches were real or mere legends remains a point of contention among epigraphers. Beyond the row of seals, you notice narrow alcoves housing jars of flattened clay tablets. These tablets record rituals performed at Inanna's temple to ensure the city's prosperity. You lift one jar's lid and inhale the faint, dusty aroma of aged clay. Each tablet is sealed with a small clay lump stamped by a different cylinder seal, like a wedding band marking ownership of a vow. Mainstream researchers agree that sealing tablets protected their contents from tampering, though the exact legal weight of a seal impression varied between city-states. You choose a green jasper seal bearing the image of a stylized gazelle. Rolling it into a fresh tablet reveals a short incantation. May Idigna guide your footsteps and keep the floods at bay. Idigna, you recall, is the marsh goddess whose favor ensures safe passage through reed-choked waterways. This inscription confirms that seals weren't solely commercial. They also carried ritual power. Some scholars propose that travelers used such seals as personal talismans, believing the gods invoked in their impressions would accompany them on perilous journeys, a hypothesis both tantalizing and disputed in academic journals. A glint of metal catches your eye on a high shelf, a bronze seal carved with the profile of a bull's head. You retrieve it carefully, feeling its reassuring heft. Rolling it into clay produces a bold emblem, the bull's horns curling into concentric circles. Bulls symbolize strength and fertility, common motifs in Sumerian iconography. Obscure iconographic studies suggest that bulls on seals also represented boundary markers, their impressions stamped onto mud-brick walls to delineate temple precincts. Yet mainstream consensus holds that most seal imagery remained personal or administrative rather than architectural. Your lamp guttering slightly, you move to a low bench where a row of broken seal fragments lies scattered. You pat each piece gently, identifying shards of shell inlay and bits of lapis set in bitumen adhesive. Ancient restorers sometimes affixed precious stones to seals to denote elite status or divine favor. Fragments unearthed at UR indicate that some seals bore tiny holes so they could be strung on necklaces, an intersection of jewelry and bureaucracy. Historians are still debating whether these necklaces signified office or served as protective amulets in their own right. You shift your attention to ritual tablets carved with incantations against floods and famines. Each tablet is carefully rolled and tied with cord before sealing. You untie one and peel back a circular clay disc stamped with the royal seal of Aratta's king. Unfurling the tablet, you read a list of offerings: barley cakes, date wine, lapis chips, and copper chippings, materials mixed into a paste and applied to temple doors. This ritual, mainstream texts tell us, symbolically anointed the city's fabric with its wealth, binding sacred space to cosmic favor. A nearby shelf displays a handful of small cones, clay nails inscribed with commemorative texts and pressed into walls as foundation deposits. These cones commemorate temple renovations and divine statutes. Though distinct from cylinder seals, they share the principle of sealing, embedding text in clay to endure beyond brick and mud. Obscure architectural treatises propose that such cones also served acoustical functions, scattering sound within temples to amplify priests' chants. While the idea is inventive, mainstream archaeologists find little physical evidence to support it, and debate continues. You notice a tall, slender tablet propped against the wall. Its face features two parallel columns of text, each sealed with a red carnelian cylinder. You carefully lift it and roll one seal across the center. A complex mythic scene depicting a winged deity offering water to mortals below. The text itself outlines the steps of a purification ritual using river water and barley mash, an evocative mix of legal prescription and magical enactment. Historians are still discussing whether such tablets functioned primarily as legal codices or as ritual manuals, or a fluid mix of both. Your fingers brush a shallow pile of clay tokens shaped like miniature house plans and animals, the forerunners of written numbers and commodities. These tokens predate seals, used to count and record goods sealed inside larger clay envelopes. Over time, these tokens were pressed onto the outside, obviating the need for the envelope itself and leading to pictographic writing. Mainstream models trace this evolution as the cradle of writing. Alternative theories suggest tokens and seals developed in parallel rather than sequentially. The debate persists among Mesopotamianists. A soft clack echoes as you place a sealed tablet atop the wooden shelf. You step back to survey the archive. Rows of seals, tablets, cones, and tokens. An entire universe of clay and stone. Each piece carries the residue of hands long gone, pressing shapes and words into pliant earth to speak across millennia. You inhale deeply, letting the mixture of clay, dust, and oil fill your lungs. The archive feels alive, every artifact a fragment of Aratta's pulse. You lift a final cylinder seal, a deep green nephrite etched with a hunting scene. Hunters with bows, dogs at their heels, a deer bounded away. Rolling it into fresh clay, the figures spring to life, each arrow in mid-flight. The seal's owner, you imagine, was a noble who commissioned scenes of prowess as a demonstration of power. Obscure prosopographers suggest that some elites used hunting imagery to advertise both their lineage and divine legitimacy, though others argue these images were purely aesthetic choices. The scholarly quarrel remains unresolved. Stepping away, you let your gaze rest on the archive's entrance, now bright with morning sun filtering through wooden latticework. You realize the archive is more than a storehouse. It's a living testament to Aratta's rituals, politics, and artistry, all encoded in clay. These seals and tablets bore witness to daily affairs, trade contracts, divine petitions, royal edicts, and private prayers. Historians are still debating whether the interplay of image and text on these objects was understood uniformly across social classes or nuanced to each viewer's status and literacy. You heft your lamp underarm and head back toward the city streets, clay dust settling in your hair. In the warm light of day, the red brick facades glow like embers, as though the city itself has been sealed in the memory of bronze and mud. You step onto the packed earth road, carrying with you the archive's heavy yet fragile stories. Each seal imprint you leave behind will vanish with time, but in your mind, the images and words are infinitely vivid. And you emerge before dawn at the broad plaza before Aratta's grand temple, where the first pale light reveals the stepped ziggurat's tiers like pages in a colossal clay codex. You pass through a low archway carved with cuneiform dedications to Inanna and Enki, the twin keepers of land and water, and step into the hushed corridor leading to the priesthood archives. The air is cool, redolent of aged clay and sesame oil from the lamp still burning at the entrance. Shelves of sun-baked bricks line both walls, each shelf grooved with shallow channels to cradle horizontal rows of clay tablets. You pause, adjusting the linen sash at your waist, as a temple acolyte glides past, bearing a fresh tablet sealed with bright red ochre clay. The archives are divided into chambers, each dedicated to a different facet of sacred knowledge. One for ritual prescriptions, one for liturgical hymns, and another for king lists and treaties. You step into the ritual chamber first, where dozens of tablets recite offerings to stave off famine and flood. Your fingertips brush over an entry dated to the reign of Uarnamu, roughly 2100 BCE, marking it as a later copy of an earlier En-mer-kar era prayer. Mainstream scholarship holds that temple archives routinely recopied older texts to preserve them against damage. Scribal schools taught this practice as part of the Aduba curriculum, ensuring continuity of tradition. Yet here, an obscure marginal note in faint cinnabar pigment records that this tablet originated not in Uruk but in Aratta itself. A startling claim that historians are still debating. You carry the ritual tablet into the liturgical chamber, where slanted shelves display tablets inscribed with hymns to the gods. Candlelight flickers against lines of neatly ordered wedges. Praise to Enki for delivering fresh waters, supplication to Idigna for safe passage through marshes, and exaltations of Aratta's metal-rich offerings. One hymn caught your eye. It portrays Aratta as a bride of bronze, her walls gleaming like molten sunlight. A little-known fact, some Sumerian poets employed a poetic device called metallic parallelism, pairing bronze imagery with water motifs to underscore divine favor. Whether this technique was born in Aratta or borrowed from Uruk bards remains under scholarly debate. Historians are still arguing which city birthed that flourish. A narrow vestibule leads you next to the epistolary chamber, where diplomatic correspondence is housed in small clay envelopes called bulli. You slide one from its niche and break it open to reveal a folded tablet inside. En-mer-kar's original demand for lapis and copper, met by a reply from Aratta's lord, delivered with courtesy and cautious defiance. The outer bulla bears the seal of Aratta's high priest, a finely carved cylinder of serpentine inlaid with shell. Seals authenticated messages and carried ritual weight. Mainstream consensus affirms that only elite scribes wielded such seals. Yet an obscure trench report from the early 20th century mentions a string of smaller, personal seals found exclusively in the epistolary chamber, leading some scholars to suggest that even junior acolytes possessed miniature seals for confidential internal memos. This provocative idea divides experts to this day. You move on to the king list alcove, where tablets named List of Rulers line the walls in chronological order. Here you find a tablet that, unlike others, lists En-mer-kar's successors as rulers over Aratta itself, an unexpected claim given that most Sumerian king lists assign Aratta no independent dynasty. This anomalous tablet was discovered in a sealed jar marked Elda of the king, implying direct royal custody. Mainstream readings treat this as a later interpolation by UR3 scribes, perhaps a political ploy to legitimize control over Aratta's legacy. However, some fringe epigraphers argue the tablet is a genuine Aratta record, suggesting the city may have had a brief line of native rulers before its fall. Historians are still debating the origins and legitimacy of that tablet. The fifth chamber, known as the Variant Narratives Room, contains versions of the Great Flood myth distributed across different temple libraries. You select a tablet that opens with, "When Inanna's tears filled the marshes," deviating from the more familiar, "When the waters of Enlil rose." Poring over the lines, you notice the protagonist is not Utnapishtim but a figure named Aratta-mu, identified as Aratta's champion who battled the deluge by building grand terraces to channel floodwaters. This variant is absent from Uruk archives, implying local adaptation. Obscure folklorists have long speculated that Aratta's priests preserved a parallel flood tradition, one emphasizing human ingenuity over divine punishment. Yet mainstream Assyriologists remain skeptical, pointing to the lack of corroborating texts outside this chamber. The debate over whether Aratta's version represents an independent tradition or a later creative revision continues strong. A secret niche in the far wall reveals clay cones, foundation pegs inscribed with dedicatory texts laid into temple walls. You retrieve one sealed with blue-green glaze, its inscription promising the gods agate-bright gates and bronze-lined floors. Most cones record temple constructions. This one, however, mentions Aratta specifically as the model for perfect metalwork. Obscure architectural studies propose that Aratta's temple influenced design in southern Sumer. Mainstream architects counter that such claims overstate Aratta's reach, viewing the reference as a metaphor rather than an actual blueprint. This difference of interpretation fuels ongoing scholarly contention. You pause at a long bench strewn with broken tablets, fragments of administrative logs detailing grain rations and labor drafts for temple works. One fragment references a work crew from Aratta, an anomaly since all other entries list local villages. If genuine, this indicates that Aratta's artisans or laborers served in foreign temple projects. Mainstream historians hesitate to accept this as evidence of cross-city labor exchange so early. Some allege the phrase results from a scribal error or misreading of logograms. The question of whether Aratta's workforce migrated to other city-states remains unresolved. In the final chamber, the scholar's sanctum, you find a raised dais where senior priests convene to debate sacred texts. An aged scribe traces a finger along a collection of red-inked colophons. Notes at the end of tablets specifying the scribe's name, date, and sometimes a personal comment. One colophon reads, "Copy made in the year King of Aratta built the second tower, under stars of the bull." A curious lunar dating unknown elsewhere. Academics are still debating whether these Aratta regnal years correspond to any calendar in southern Mesopotamia or represent an independent dating scheme lost to time. You step back into the corridor, heart heavy with the weight of these layered testimonies. The priesthood archives have preserved multiple faces of Aratta. Diplomatic hub, ritual center, rival kingdom, innovator in flood lore. You realize that history here is not a single stream but a confluence of currents shaped by scribes with pens and chisels. The faint clatter of an acolyte's clay tablet sliding into place echoes behind you as you turn toward the exit. Outside, the morning sun has risen fully. You step into a dimly lit chamber off the temple's northern wing, where rows of clay tablets are arranged like books on low shelves. The air smells of damp mud and sesame oil smoke, still clinging from last night's lamps. You kneel before a narrow bench cluttered with fragments bearing cuneiform columns, each a version of the Sumerian king list. Flickering torchlight reveals variations in wedge-shaped strokes. Some lines lightly incised, others deeply carved, suggesting different scribal hands. You sense that here, in the hush of Aratta's sanctum, the story of who ruled and for how long was never written in stone but molded in pliant clay, shaped by politics as much as by memory. The canonical Sumerian king list is a monumental document, tracing rulers from antediluvian dynasties through historical city-states. Compiled in its earliest iteration around 2100 BCE under UR3, the list blends myth and history, assigning superhuman reigns to pre-flood kings and more modest tenures to later rulers. Mainstream historians regard it as both a political manifesto and an attempt to legitimize contemporary dynasties by tying them to divine origins. Yet the list's inclusion or omission of certain cities reveals scribal agendas. Only select powers earned a place among these regnal chronicles, while others faded into omission. You lift the first complete tablet, a Uruk copy remarkably intact. Its lines praise En-mer-kar as the earliest king of Uruk and record his conquest of Aratta as tribute payer rather than sovereign. Here, Aratta appears not as an independent seat but as a vassal, its rulers absent from the main roster. You trace each cuneiform sign, noticing reiterations of 400 years that seem improbable yet symbolic. Mainstream scholarship recognizes those long reigns as mythic placeholders, marking eras beyond mortal reckoning. Historians are still debating whether such inflated figures served purely literary purposes or encoded astronomical cycles now lost to time. Next, you examine a variant from Nippur, its text broken in places but revealing a different ordering. This Nippur tablet omits Aratta entirely, listing only Lagash, Umma, and Uruk among pre-flood cities. It then leaps straight to the post-Diluvian dynasties, assigning legendary reigns to Kish and Uar. In this version, Aratta is never named, a curious absence given its prominence in En-mer-kar's epic. Some scholars argue that local scribes in Nippur deliberately excised non-local kingdoms to emphasize their city's primacy. Others suggest simple accident or damage over time, The debate lingers, and historians are still debating the motives behind these omissions. You recall reading of a mid-20th century excavation at the palace storeroom, where thousands of broken tablets lay heaped in a flooded trench. Archaeologists painstakingly reassembled dozens of fragments, piecing together yet another version of the king list. In that find, Aratta is bracketed between Eridu and Bad Tibera, flanked by a pair of kings never seen elsewhere. You imagine the excavator's excitement, matching shards with inked drawings on catalog sheets. Such storeroom discoveries reveal that Aratta's memory shifted with each recopying, as scribes inserted or erased dynasties to suit shifting political winds. An obscure footnote in the excavation report mentions a solitary slab miscatalogued in the British Museum stores until the 1980s. Only after infrared imaging matched its faint incisions to the storeroom fragments did scholars recognize it belonged to that variant list. For decades, the tablet languished under unknown origin, a silent witness to scribal creativity. The rediscovery rewrote scholarly timelines, proving that Aratta's dynastic mentions were once more widespread than assumed. Yet some still view this as an outlier, an accidental gloss rather than evidence of a distinct tradition. Academic consensus remains unsettled. Was that variant a deliberate local composition celebrating Aratta's fleeting sovereignty, or merely a scribal attempt to preserve its name in fading memory? Historians are still debating whether such lists represent genuine political records or fragmentary folk traditions co-opted by professional scribes. The king list's divergences could reflect competing royal houses vying for prestige, or simply chance errors multiplying with each copying cycle. Whatever the answer, the clay tablets bear witness to a contested past, every wedge and stroke echoing debates lost to antiquity. Determined to compare lists in person, you travel along a narrow causeway toward the temple at Umma. There, another chamber houses tablets catalogued as alternative dynastic registers. You find a tall, slender tablet inscribed with 8 columns, each column a separate recapitulation of rulership. Column 3 names Aratta's own line of kings, a triad of rulers bearing the title Lugal-Aratt. Their reigns span implausible centuries, but their names, Uar-Aratt, Nin-Aratt, and Lu-Aratt, appear nowhere else. You press your finger to one name in relief, Nin-Aratt, Lady of Aratta, a striking title suggesting female sovereignty, an anomaly in Sumerian records. This tablet uses a rare sign for Aratt, combining the glyph for copper with a stylized mountain, unlike the common copper alone, pairing you saw in earlier epics. Epigraphers debate whether this variant sign points to a distinct dialect or a localized scribal tradition. Some propose Aratta's scribes invented their own orthography to distinguish their identity. Others argue the sign was merely decorative, not phonetic. Historians are still debating the implications of these orthographic anomalies for our understanding of Sumerian literacy. You imagine the scribes gathered in a tiled courtyard, clay tablets before them, quills in hand, each vying to claim authority by ordering names just so. Rival artisans may have produced competing copies, each backed by different priestly factions or merchant guilds. In the roaring debates of those workshops, the decision to include or exclude Aratta's kings could have real political weight, affecting regional alliances or temple endowments. Yet we'll never see their heated words, only the silent clay that preserved their choices. Back in Uruk, you discover evidence of palimpsests. Tablets cleaned and recut, their original inscriptions painstakingly scraped away. Under ultraviolet light, you glimpse ghostly indents of erased names, faint lines that once wrote Aratta's rulers into the list before being expunged. Such erasures hint at censorship. Perhaps a later dynasty sought to downplay Aratta's prior independence. Yet some scholars argue the erasures stem from practical reuse of clay, not ideological motives. Historians are still debating whether even mundane resource reuse drove these redactions as much as power plays did. You gather all variants on a broad table: the Uruk copy, the Nippur omission, the Umma alternative, and the storeroom palimpsest. Each tablet displays different regnal years. Some assign 420 years to a post-flood king, others only 60. The antediluvian section balloons with unreal durations, 28,800 years for one line, while post-diluvian reigns settle into more believable spans of 20 to 50 years. Mainstream readings link the mythical long rains to lunar cycles. Obscure theories chalk them up to scribal error in numeral signs. The numeric mysteries persist, with historians still debating how ancient Sumerians conceptualized time. You line up tiny fragments noting rain lengths carved in Nubian script, the wedge-notched numerals distinct from cuneiform words. You trace each cluster of wedges, a handful meaning 100, another meaning 10, and so on. One fragment has the sign for 600, mistakenly inverted, creating a rain 10 times longer than intended. This slip may explain some outlandish figures. Yet other tablets use a different numeral system entirely, mixing sexagesimal and decimal notations. Historians are still debating whether such mixing reflects evolving accounting practices or localized conventions. As dusk falls, you return to the temple's main archive, carting your comparative collection of tablets. You place them in a neat row before the head librarian, a stern woman whose own seal marks dozens of entries. She studies each tablet, nods, then releases a soft sigh. History, she murmurs, is shaped by those who write it. She reaches for a fresh tablet, dips her stylus in oil, and begins carving a new copy of the king list, one that might reconcile Aratta's place in the annals for future generations. Yet you know that even this new version will carry its own biases. You step outside into the cool night, moonlight glimmering on the ziggurats terraces. In your satchel, the tablets rest like heavy promises. You realize that king lists are not mere records. They are political instruments, cultural mirrors, and theological statements all at once. The story of Aratta's rulers diverges with each recopying because history itself was a malleable commodity in the ancient world. And as you walk beneath stars once charted by Sumerian astrologers, you carry with you not a single truth but a chorus of voices, each list a thread in the vast, tangled tapestry of memory. You arrive before dawn at a low mud-brick shrine perched on the edge of the old floodplain, the horizon still a ribbon of pale gold. A cool mist clings to your shoulders as you step onto the packed earth courtyard, where shallow channels carry last night's dew toward a central basin. This is the place where Aratta's priests convene to perform the rituals against the deluge, the ceremonies meant to placate storm gods and ensure floodwaters rise gently, nourishing fields rather than sweeping them away. You take a steadying breath, feeling the weight of centuries in the damp air, and follow a narrow path toward the altar. In mainstream Sumerian tradition, flood myths center on gods like Enlil, whose wrath unleashed the waters, and Enki, whose cunning saved a remnant of humanity. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though penned much later, echoes this older ritual context. Annual ceremonies reenacted the divine deluge to renew cosmic order. At Aratta, these rituals likely predate the written epic, rooted in seasonal inundations that farmers both feared and depended upon. You recall temple records from Uruk describing the flood observance, held in the month of, or approximately May, when canals brimmed and levees creaked under pressure, an early example of urban hydrology intertwined with sacred performance. You step past a pair of reed fences marking the ritual precinct and notice offerings piled in neat rows. Conical loaves of barley bread, bowls of date syrup, and small heaps of lapis chips. Mainstream temple inventories list these staples as standard sacrificial items, dedicated to storm deities in exchange for mercy. Yet here you see also hammered bronze droplets arranged in circles. Delicate tears for the goddess Nanshi, patroness of marshes and social justice. An obscure text fragment found at Lagash hints that bronze droplets smeared on the forehead of a priest represented tears of contrition, though few scholars have studied this practice. Whether Aratta adopted this custom directly or developed its own variant remains a point of contention among historians. You pause at a clay basin filled with clear canal water, its surface smooth as glass. Priests will use it for libations, pouring oil and beer to blend with the life-giving floodwaters. A soft joke escapes your lips. Hope you like cold beer, Enki. You suspect the gods have a dry sense of humor, rewarding humility but never lacking for irony. As you watch, a priest stirs the water with a reed staff, murmuring incantations to calm the river's heart. Academic debate persists over the exact wording of these incantations. Some fragments use archaic dialect forms, suggesting a ritual too archaic for even temple librarians to fully decipher. Beside the basin, you see a low platform draped in fresh reed mats and woven horsehair. On it rest carved fish skulls tied with red string, a lesser-known ritual item thought to represent the dead drowned in floods. Archaeobotanists found traces of similar fish remains in temple waste pits at Ur, suggesting they burned or buried such relics after ceremonies. Whether Aratta's priests burned these skulls atop reed bundles or interred them beneath altar foundations remains ambiguous. Scholars are still debating the precise disposal rites for these aquatic offerings. You follow the priests down a narrow passage into a subterranean chapel lined with niches. Each niche holds a small jar of white powder, pulverized gypsum, used to inscribe temporary cuneiform warnings against rising waters on the vault's walls. You run your fingertip over a fresh inscription. Let the waters rest. Let the land breathe. Mainstream readings identify these gypsum scribbles as apotropaic inscriptions, meant to ward off flooding like a charm. Yet in the 1950s, a fringe theory proposed they functioned as early barometers, with gypsum absorbing humidity and expanding to signal incoming storms. Most historians dismiss that notion, insisting these powders served purely magical symbolism, but the debate lingers. Emerging into an open courtyard, you don a simple white linen robe provided by an acolyte. The robe's hem bears a border embossed with wave and cloud motifs, a visual prayer against watery wrath. Textiles bearing similar motifs appear in some temple vestments at Nippur, though evidence for their use in flood rituals is scant. Obscure textile fragments recovered near Ur hint at colorful weave patterns signifying divine favor. Whether Aratta's robe patterns matched or innovated those of southern cities is under scholarly discussion. You step onto a raised stage facing the river's ancient course, where smoke from small clay lamps churns along the ground like drifting mist. The head priest stands before you, bronze scepter in hand, eyes closed in solemn focus. He lifts his voice, reciting a hymn that traces the deluge from primeval times, when Tiamat's waters were slain by Marduk, whose body formed the firm earth. Although that Babylonian myth postdates Aratta's heyday, early versions praising Enki's role in shaping the world survive in fragmentary Sumerian lines. Historians are still debating how much of Aratta's own mythic narrative derived from shared Mesopotamian lore versus unique local traditions. The hymn ends, and the priest pours a libation of date wine onto the earth, splashing droplets at the base of a carved stone basin shaped like a fish. You kneel beside him, cupping your hands and allowing the wine to seep into the soil. No floods today, you whisper half in jest, half in prayer. A ripple passes over the water in the basin, though air is still. Whether this is divine reply or the faintest breeze you cannot hear remains a mystery, an anecdote that will fuel scholarly debate long after you are gone. Next, the priest calls for the ritual walk. You stand, following him along a pre-laid path of crushed limestone and reed fragments. With each step, you turn slightly inward, facing the path as though it were the riverbank itself. Mainstream sources cite this circumambulation as a form of sympathetic magic, mirroring the river's course to calm its turbulence. Yet, an obscure commentary in a temple notebook suggests the walk symbolized humanity's journey from flood chaos toward agricultural stability. The dual interpretations, practical magic versus allegorical enactment, remain contested among ritual specialists. Reaching the far corner of the courtyard, you find a low water chute, a carved channel through which priests release final offerings into the river's flow. The acolyte passes you a small reed basket heaped with miniature boats carved from date palm wood, each carrying a token of silver dust and jasmine petals. You gently lower your boat into the chute. It glides forward, catches the current, and disappears around a bend. In mainstream scholarship, such floating votives symbolize safe passage across life's dangers, from river floods to cosmic perils. Marginal notes in one Aratta ledger, however, hint that the boats were also used to measure current speed, watched by priests to forecast high waters. That notion, though fascinating, remains speculative. You return to the altar, where a circle of barley cakes awaits. The head priest instructs you to select one and break it into 4 pieces, offering each to one of the 4 winds. You dust a piece lightly with turmeric, an exotic spice brought from distant mountains, and cast it northward. The remaining fragments you place at the feet of a small bronze idol of Enlil, whose domain includes storms and tempests. Mainstream guides describe similar multi-directional offerings at Ur and Lagash. Yet some believe Aratta's use of turmeric indicates trade links to the Indus Valley, where the spice was prized. Whether turmeric reached Aratta directly via those routes or through intermediate traders is still under study. As the sun climbs, a low rumble echoes across the plain. You tense, recalling the ancient term namtir, divine thunder, believed to precede floods. But the sound fades into silence. A priest waves a scented smoke bundle of cedar and frankincense overhead, its aroma weaving around you. You inhale deeply, steadying yourself with a light-hearted thought. If the gods appreciate nice smells, they'll spare you this season's harvest. Marvin of Lagash, the only non-Sumerian name you ever recall seeing in temple notes, supposedly suggested mixing frankincense with crushed shell to amplify its potency. Historians debate whether that was a genuine experiment or a scribal joke. With the prayers complete, the priests gather their tools, reed wands, bronze bowls, clay hypocephali, and file back into the subterranean chapel to seal the inscriptions once more. You remain in the courtyard, breathing the cool morning air, watching small whirlwinds dance across the cracked earth. The central basin's water gleams as you approach. You cup a handful and sip, tasting salt and faint copper undertones, reminders of the metal that defined Aratta's legacy. You whisper thanks to the river spirit Idigna for allowing this moment of calm. Before you depart, you collect a small clay token stamped with the head priest's seal, proof that you participated in the rituals against the deluge. This token will grant you safe passage through temple gates during next year's observance, marking you as one who honors the gods and respects the rhythms of earth and water. As you sling it around your neck, you feel the weight of Aratta's hopes upon your chest. You step back onto the pathway leading out of the precinct, each reed mat and carved stone beneath your feet echoing. You slip away from the temple precinct and make your way back to the artisan quarter, where the morning sun has not yet chased away the last wisps of smoke curling above the forges. Narrow alleys of packed earth lead you between low brick workshops, their doorways marked by simple incised spirals denoting metallurgical guilds. You pause outside a stout building whose entrance is flanked by two battered clay stoves, each a clay-lined furnace cooled only hours ago. The smoke still clings to the lintel, a gray film that tastes faintly of copper, charcoal, and clay. This is the heart of Aratta's forge district, and within these walls lie the closely guarded secrets of metal made divine. You step inside, the air thick with heat and the acrid tang of smelting fires. Sparks drift upward like captive fireflies, caught in invisible eddies beneath a low domed ceiling. The floor is strewn with broken grinding stones, hammer fragments, and dross. Waste metal slag that glitters like black glass under torchlight. A master smith stands before a circular hearth, tending a small bloom of molten metal at its center. You can almost taste the metallic sweetness in the air. A single breath feels as if you inhale the city's very lifeblood. At the forge's core are two twin furnaces, each built from fire-hardened clay and lined with crushed quartz, sand to withstand temperatures surpassing 1,000 degrees Celsius. Mainstream archaeometallurgical studies date this design to around 3000 BCE, a Sumerian innovation that allowed more efficient copper smelting. You remember that Aratta's bronze was famed not only for its luster but for its consistency. So much so that the city's name became synonymous with metal mastery in poetic hymns. Historians are still debating exactly how Sumerian artisans achieved such high temperatures using only goatskin bellows and charcoal, given the limitations of pre-Iron Age technology. You kneel beside the master smith as he stokes the fire with a pair of paddle-shaped bellows. Each depression in his leather apparatus puffs oxygen into the furnace with the hiss of a serpent, intensifying the flame to a white-hot core. A cloud of smoke billows upward through a narrow flue, its dark tendrils twisting against the ceiling. You watch as the smith dips a long iron rod into the furnace's throat and extracts a glowing bloom of copper, its surface rippling with molten waves. He lays it on a bed of sand to cool slightly before hammering. You follow the bloom onto a nearby anvil, a single slab of basalt scarred with centuries of hammer blows. The smith hammers in rhythmic strokes that reverberate through the workshop. Each crash rings like a bell, testing the metal's ductility and revealing hidden fractures. Mainstream evidence shows Sumerian smiths developed a technique called tempering, heating the bloom, quenching it in water, then reheating it to a lower temperature to relieve stress. This early form of heat treatment improved metal toughness, a process archaeometallurgists confirmed through microstructural analysis of surviving bronze artifacts. Yet some obscure researchers argue the Sumerians may have discovered these thermal effects accidentally, later codifying them into practice. Historians are still debating how intentional these early tempering cycles truly were. As the bloom cools, you move to a low bench where apprentices mix alloys. You spy fragments of cassiterite, a tin oxide, or piled beside crushed malachite and green-blue azurite. While tin was rare in Mesopotamia, trade networks from the mountainous regions to the northeast delivered small supplies of ore. Mainstream scholarship places the start of true tin-bronze production around 2500 BCE. Yet tablets from Ur and Nippur hint that Aratta's smiths experimented with tin ores as early as 2700 BCE. Some argue those references denote arsenical bronze, mixing copper with arsenic-bearing minerals rather than tin, while others insist small tin productions occurred. Historians continue debating whether Sumerians mastered tin smelting or relied primarily on arsenic-copper alloys for hardness. A small apprentice holds a clay tablet, a cuneiform recipe for a soft solder used to join bronze pieces. It instructs, grind 6 parts copper, 1 part tin or 1 part charcoal, and 1 pinion of natron. Mix, knead with goat's fat and apply to the seam. Heat until the surface glows faintly red. You read the tablet by the flickering lamplight, marveling at the precision of measurements in shekels and minas. A little-known fact, some of these recipes included crushed sea salt, sodium chloride, to reduce oxidation and help flux impurities out of the alloy. Though early scholars dismissed salt as accidental contamination, recent reanalyses of slag nodules revealed chloride crystals embedded in furnace linings, suggesting deliberate use. Whether salt truly functioned as flux or simply adhered to raw ore remains a subject of lively academic debate. You rise to examine an isolated corner where molds lie piled in careful rows. Some are cut from fine-grained clay, carved with intricate negative shapes of spearheads and axe blades. Others are simple stone matrices. One particular clay mold bears the imprint of a complex mace head, 10 facets radiating from a central socket. You slip a protective pad under your arm and lift it, marveling at the precision of each cavity. Digital scans of similar molds show slight shrinkage rates of about 8%, matching the contraction of bronze in cooling. Scholars have argued whether molds were oiled with vegetable fat to ease casting or simply dusted with sand. The debate continues, with both sides supported by fragmentary archaeobotanical and petrographic data. Nearby stands a low pit where artisans practice open casting, pouring molten bronze into shallow clay trays to produce ingots. You step closer as a smith ladles glowing metal across the rim. The liquid bronze spreads with a muted roar, filling each trough until it overflows, creating sprues that the smith later chops off with a cold chisel. A shower of sparks arcs up, and you feel warmth on your face. You recall an obscure excavation report that noted unusual lumps of dendritic bronze, branching patterns indicating rapid cooling. Some experimental archaeologists interpret these as evidence of cooled pour-off used as doorstops, a curious repurposing of waste. Whether these cast-off nodules served practical functions or were simply discarded scrap remains a playful tangent for specialists. You step back and watch a young smith reheating a small bronze vessel, an offering bowl stamped with the seal of Aratta's high priest. He holds it over a charcoal brazier, rotating it slowly to encourage even heat distribution. A plume of blue flame flickers around the rim. This process, known as annealing, softens work-hardened metal, making it malleable for final shaping. While crucible furnaces handle bulk smelting, these smaller hearths are essential for finishing touches. Historians are still debating how widespread such dual furnace systems were in Sumerian cities. Some sites show only large bloomery furnaces, others reveal clusters of small hearths suggesting specialized workshops. Moving deeper into the forge, you find a sheltered courtyard where mortar and pestle sets rest atop low pedestals. The pestles are worn smooth, each set carved from different stones. Sandstone, basalt, and even delicate white marble, oddly out of place here. Apprentices grind ores to powder, preparing pigments for ceramic glazes and for fluxes in smelting. Obscure pigment analyses have identified traces of malachite, azurite, and even cinnabar mixed into pastes for temple decorations, implying cross-pollination between metallurgical and artistic crafts. Whether the same artisans handled both metal and pigment remains unclear, but their tools often co-occur in excavation contexts. At the center of the courtyard stands the forge's prized possession, a massive anvil block of black basalt set atop a stone pedestal carved with fish scale patterns. This great anvil bears notches and divots from centuries of use, a silent record of every blade, tool, and ornament formed here. You tap its surface with a bronze rod. The tone rings clear, resonating like a small bell. Scribes once noted that a well-tuned anvil could signal the purity of the metal by its ring, an early form of acoustic quality control. While later Mesopotamian texts describe such tests explicitly, mainstream scholars debate whether Sumerians understood the physics behind resonance or treated it as trial-and-error tradition. The argument lingers, with experimental reconstructions offering mixed results. You wander toward a low shelf where small kilns for enameling lie in shadow. Each kiln is shaped like an inverted cone, its interior glazed with clay slips. You recall how earlier you saw artisans filling recessed bronze plaques with crushed glass, fiery blues and greens that caught torchlight like gemstones. Firing these enamels requires precise temperature control. Too hot, and the glass runs; too cool, and it fails to fuse. Archaeological thermoluminescence studies suggest temperatures around 700 degrees Celsius were optimal, a narrow window to hit with charcoal alone. Metallurgists are still debating whether Sumerian enameling techniques were spontaneously invented in Aratta or imported from Anatolian traditions. Nearby, a small brazier holds charred remains of roofing reed bundles, likely repurposed as bellows insulation. You scoop a handful of the brittle reeds into your satchel, curious to see if you slip through a narrow archway into the vaulted treasury of Aratta, where torchlight dances off treasures that gleam like captured sunlight. The air is cool and smells faintly of frankincense and aged wood mixed with the metallic tang of stored bronze. You pause at the threshold, your heart thudding as though you're about to step onto a stage, because here lies the city's mythic hoard. Relics credited with divine provenance, objects of wonder. Some real, some perhaps spun from poetic license. The first chamber greets you with rows of stone busts and small statuettes carved from rare stones: carnelian, serpentine, and a handful of lapis lazuli so deep in color it seems to swallow the torch's flame. Mainstream historians confirm that Sumerians prized lapis lazuli above all gemstones, imported over 1,500 miles from Badakhshan mines to workshops in Ur and beyond. Here in Aratta, they fashioned delicate beads and inlays that adorned temple doors and ceremonial weapons. You lift a small bead the size of a cherry, feeling its cool weight between thumb and forefinger. Beside the lapis, you spot a cluster of pale green chalcedony amulets carved into the shapes of horned bulls. These likely served apotropaic functions, warding off evil eye and misfortune. A little-known fact is that some Sumerian amulets were drilled with tiny channels so that they could be strung on reed necklaces and even filled with scented oils during rituals, a practice seldom recorded outside scattered excavation notes. Whether Aratta's chalcedony bulls held oils or remained dry talismans is unclear. Scholars are still debating the evidence for perfumed amulets in the Bronze Age. You step into the next bay, where a long wooden shelf displays dozens of small, sealed jars bearing corroded lids of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver that gleams with a pale, ghostly luster. Electrum was rarer and more mysterious than pure gold, sourced either from Anatolian streams or local placer deposits. Mainstream sources note that Sumerians used electrum to cast delicate filigree jewelry and decorative studs for royal garments. Here, in Aratta, jars labeled bride's dowry metal sit quietly, hinting at lavish wedding gifts offered to temple priestesses. You imagine brides draped in fine cloth, their robes weighted with electrum pendants that swayed like captured dawn. At the room's center, a raised dais holds the most revered object, a small bronze statuette of Inanna, the eight-browed queen of heaven and earth. Its surface is so polished that you see your own pale reflection in the goddess's breastplate. This statuette is crowned with a diadem of gold leaf and inset with 5 colored stones: garnet, lapis, carnelian, turquoise, and onyx, arranged in a pattern said to mirror the 5 celestial bodies known to Sumerian astronomers. A mainstream astronomical tablet aligns those planets with divine attributes: Venus, Inanna herself, Jupiter, Marduk, Mercury, Nabu, Mars, Nergal, and Saturn, Enlil. Yet some epigraphers argue that the diadem's stone arrangement was purely decorative, later rationalized by astrologers. Historians are still debating whether the planetary alignment was intentional from the outset or a retroactive interpretation. You move to a shadowed alcove where a low table is draped in lush fabrics woven from goat hair and lightly scented with cedarwood chips. Resting atop are 7 small boxes of beaten gold, each box hammered so thin you can almost read through it. These are the storied 7 chaplets of Aratta, described in a fragmentary hymn as gifts fit for the gods themselves. The hymn boasts, "We adorned her head with 7 circles of gold that sang in the breeze, though that singing may be poetic flourish." A rare journal article from the 1970s claimed to find tiny holes in one chaplet, suggesting they once held small bells. Yet subsequent analyses failed to confirm those holes were man-made rather than pitting from corrosion. Scholars are still debating if the chaplets ever truly rang or remained silent halos of metal grace. Further in, you discover a low stone plinth supporting a series of small, translucent glass vessels. Vials of melted glass cast into thin, colored sheets and rolled into spiral shapes. Glassmaking in Mesopotamia dates to around 2000 BCE, but evidence suggests earlier experiments at high-temperature furnaces in remote courtyards. A few shards from Aratta bear chemical signatures matching basalt sands from the nearby Zagros foothills, implying local glass innovation rather than imported methods. Yet mainstream glass historians caution that sample sizes are too small to overturn the prevailing view that glass technology diffused from Egyptian or Levantine centers. The debate over Aratta's role in early glassmaking still simmers in specialist circles. You kneel to examine one spiraled vial. Its pale blue body curls in upon itself like a coiled serpent, and when light catches its edge, you see tiny air bubbles trapped in the glass, evidence of imperfect removal during melting. An obscure article theorized that these bottles contained precious oils, cedar, poppy seed, or fragrant resins, handed as votive offerings to Inanna. Whether they held perfume or incense remains an open question, as no direct residue analyses have been published. Historians are still debating the primary use of early glass vessels in ritual contexts. Across a narrow passage, you enter a hall of gem-studded weapons. Bronze dagger blades lean against the wall, their hilts inlaid with bands of lapis and carnelian. One blade's pommel is capped with a garnet cabochon that seems to glow from within, as though lit by an inner flame. Mainstream arms experts note that precious stone inlays served not only decorative functions but also conveyed status. Only high-ranking warriors or temple guards bore such luxuries into battle or ceremony. Yet some military historians argue that inlaid weapons were never used on actual battlefields but reserved solely for ritual processions, their practical edge often dulled to preserve those precious stones. The argument turns on scant evidence. Few battlefield contexts have yielded gem-inlaid blades, so scholars are still debating the true function of these dazzling weapons. Beside the weapons, you find a small mosaic panel made of tesserae cut from shell, lapis, and bronze leaf. Its fragments show a lion griffin confronting a bull, emblematic of cosmic balance. Mosaic art in Mesopotamia is rare. Most lavish inlays come from Egypt's pre-dynastic period. Some art historians propose Aratta devised its own mosaic technique by slicing thin metal and stone sheets rather than pressing cubes of colored clay. This bold innovation, if confirmed, would push back the earliest known mosaic by centuries. However, mainstream consensus holds that the panel is a later restoration or even a misattributed piece from the Near Eastern Renaissance period. Historians remain divided, and the panel's origins continue to stir debate. You wander into the final chamber, lit only by shafted sunlight from a high oculus, dust motes swirling like tiny sparks of light. Here lies the so-called Well of Wonders, a stone pit lined with black basalt, containing water that reflects your image as though in a polished mirror. Legend has it that this water possesses the essence of Aratta's treasure. Drink from it, and you glimpse vaults of gold, or so the old hymn sings. You kneel to peer into its depths, half expecting your reflection to shimmer into forms not your own. Instead, you see pale clouds overhead and the flicker of torchlight in your eyes. Mainstream archaeologists treat the well as a ritual cistern used for purification rites. A fringe narrative posits that the water's basalt lining imparted trace minerals that gave it a subtle sheen, inspiring the myth of miraculous reflections. Historians are still debating the interplay between ritual function and emergent legend in this curious feature. As you step back, you notice a small cluster of stylized scarab-shaped seals carved from steatite and painted with reddish ochre. Scarabs are Egyptian symbols of rebirth, yet these seals bear cuneiform imprints, merging two iconographic worlds. The presence of scarab imagery in early Sumerian contexts is tenuous. Some suggest these seals came from Mareotis traders or as gifts from nomadic caravans touching both regions. Whether Aratta's artisans adopted foreign motifs directly or through intermediaries remains a subject of academic dispute. You continue along the curved wall, passing a set of tiny bronze mirrors, concave, polished on one side, the other forming ridged backs shaped like lotus petals. Mirrors in antiquity were precious, often kept in cloth wrappers to protect their surfaces. Mainstream curators note that Sumerian mirrors were likely cast in leaded bronze, achieving a high polish. Yet a couple of these Aratta examples show traces of silver plating, an advanced technique unattested in most contemporary Mesopotamian sites. If genuine, these plated mirrors predate known silver plating technology by centuries. Some scholars propose trade or craft migration from early Iranian plateau centers. Others warn that the silver traces could result from modern contamination during excavation. The debate remains unresolved. At the room's far end sits a simple clay box sealed with a modest seal rather than the grand cylinder you expected. Intrigued, you break the seal and lift the lid, revealing a single object wrapped in linen. You slip through a low archway into a secluded corridor of the temple's upper terrace, where the heavy scent of incense hangs like mist across smooth stone. Here, the sun's first rays penetrate only through narrow slits, illuminating a pair of massive reliefs carved into the wall, one depicting a horned goddess with upraised arms, the other a bearded god pouring water from a jug. Your heart quickens as you recognize them. Inanna, radiant queen of heaven and earth, and Enki, lord of freshwater and wisdom. Their visages face one another across a blank stretch of stone, as though poised on the brink of some cosmic confrontation. You pause, fingertips grazing the cold relief, feeling the fine tool marks left by ancient masons. It's as if you've stumbled upon the stage before the actors appear, and you sense that Aratta's fate once hung in the balance here. You advance between the panels, torchlight flickering on the floor's mosaic of glazed brick. While the Sumerian pantheon numbered dozens of deities, two figures dominated the divine hierarchy: Enki of Eridu, whose sanctuary at the ocean's edge embodied the primordial waters, and Inanna of Uruk, whose temple Iana served both as goddess's earthly seat and as the cultural heart of southern Sumer. Mainstream historians date worship of Enki to the Ubaid period, circa 5000 BCE, with his name literally meaning Lord of the Abzu, the subterranean freshwater domain. Inanna, by contrast, emerges in texts around 3500 BCE, her martial and erotic aspects captured in countless hymns. Here at Aratta, you find evidence that both gods claimed patronage. A dedicatory plaque to Enki smuggled into a later foundation deposit, and a separate stone bench inscribed, "For the Lady of Heaven." Scholars have long debated whether Aratta's rulers wove dual allegiance into their political theology or simply grafted potent southern cults onto local traditions. Historians are still questioning whether Enki or Inanna stood as Aratta's primary protector. You press on into a smaller antechamber, drawn by the murmur of priests' voices drifting down from a vaulted sanctuary. Huddled in hushed tones, they recite verses from a battered clay tablet, each syllable a thread in the tapestry of divine rivalry. You creep closer, flattening yourself against cool stone, until you catch fragments. Inanna proclaimed, "Let Aratta's bells ring with gold and lapis. Let its warriors stand proud." The reply crackles like fire. Enki cautioned, "Beware the waters you cannot bind. If pride surges, let floodwaters flow." Their voices merge with the distant drip of water from a hidden cistern, creating a counterpoint of flame and flood. An obscure tablet discovered in a collapsed storeroom at Lagash refers to a similar dialogue, labeling it a council of the two powers, though some modern epigraphers dismiss it as a later literary flourish. The question remains, was this dispute an actual ritual performance enacted by temple actors, or a poetic allegory penned by court scribes to justify hydraulic works? Academic debate still rages, with advocates on both sides marshalling scant textual fragments and architectural clues. Beyond the antechamber, you enter a circular hall where half-statues of Inanna and Enki stand atop pedestals flanking a small altar. The goddess wears her iconic horned crown and carries a rosette-tipped rod, while the god grips a spouted vessel from which water once trickled. You imagine water flowing now as part of a Waknijan, wet covenant ritual, though the troughs that channeled liquid are long since blocked. Mainstream archaeologists attribute these statues to the late 3rd millennium BCE, based on stylistic parallels with Uar's Yana temple sculptures. Yet a niche group of scholars contends these may be later Aratta period copies, installed to assert local claims of divine favor. Their argument rests on minor stylistic deviations. Inanna's crown here has an extra pair of flanges, and Enki's water flows in a sinuous double stream unlike any found in Eridu. Historians remain divided over whether these nuances denote a distinct Arattan school of divine portraiture or simply regional artistic license. You step over broken shards of glazed brick, once fragments of colorful wall paintings depicting divine assemblies, into a smaller side chamber where fish-scale motifs cover the low walls. Here, you encounter a niche devoted to Nanshi, goddess of marshes and social justice. A small carved relief shows her with one palm raised, the other holding a basket of fish. You kneel, noting the fine incisions that form tiny scales, each one carved by hand rather than stamped. A little-known fact, fragments of Nanshi reliefs discovered at Larsa include anomalies, fish portrayed with human faces, suggesting a local myth of shape-shifting water spirits that only Nanshi could tame. Whether that myth originated in Aratta's wetlands or migrated via oral tradition from the nearby Isen region remains a lively matter of scholarly contention. Historians are still exploring whether Nanshi served as mediator in divine councils held here between Enki and Inanna, given her associations with water communities and social harmony. Rising, you follow a narrow staircase woven with shadows and fresco remnants into a lofty reliquary chamber. Your torch casts upward flickers on an overhead dome painted with roaming constellations. Venus's path traced in gold leaf, marked Inanna's chariot. The Aquarius sign rendered as a man pouring water, marked Enki's gift. This celestial map anchors the deity's terrestrial rivalry to cosmic cycles. Inanna's ascension as morning star symbolized renewal and power, while Enki's water-bearer role echoed the hidden aquifers sustaining life. Mainstream astronomical compendia, such as the Mul-Apen, codify these associations. Yet some obscure Assyriologists argue that Aratta's ritual dome predated Mul-Apen by centuries, and may represent an independent star chart tradition. The debate hinges on radiocarbon dates from charred wooden beams supporting this very dome. Anomalous results that suggest a construction episode well before southern Sumer's documented star catalogs. In one corner of the reliquary, you discover a weathered drum, its skin long gone, leaving only wooden hoops carved with relief scenes. The rim carvings depict Inanna wielding a scimitar and Enki brandishing a coiled serpent staff. You trace the patterns with your thumb. Each notch marks a festival year in a 19-year lunar cycle, implying this drum accompanied an annual ceremony dramatizing the gods' rivalry. While the Akitu festival at Babylon later featured Enlil as adversary and Marduk as victor, Aratta's drum suggests a parallel tradition focused on sexual martial tensions between Inanna and Enki. Scholars are still debating whether this festival persisted beyond Aratta's decline or was absorbed into neighboring cults, leaving only vague echoes in Akkadian literature. The ground beneath the drum bears powdery traces of ochre and gypsum, mineral pigments used to color ritual garments. You kneel to scoop a pinch. The ochre's warm hue reminds you of sunrise, fitting for Inanna's domains, while the gypsum's cool white evokes Enki's freshwater springs. Mainstream texts mention priestly processions dressed in red and white mantles, alternating colors to honor each deity in turn. But an obscure liturgical manual found in Nippur lists a third color, deep violet, associated with a minor god named Taimelu, a figure absent in most Sumerian pantheons. Some theorize Taimelu was a local Arattan deity who mediated between Enki and Inanna, offering a third voice in their council. Historians are still debating whether this triadic model reflects genuine tritheism or a scribal attempt to integrate local cults into established hierarchies. Leaving the reliquary, you pass beneath a lintel carved with a single line of cuneiform. Whichever god prevails, let Aratta stand firm. That echo of poetic neutrality belies the fierce theological debates that once raged here. You step into the twilight courtyard, where statues of both deities face one another across a shallow pool. Inanna's reflection shimmers like burning metal, Enki's like rippling water. You imagine priests pacing this space, voices rising in chant as they pleaded for divine favor, each line of tablet recited with precise intonation. The rivalry wasn't merely mythic. It shaped irrigation policies, festival calendars, and even succession rituals for Aratta's rulers. You wander to the pool's edge and dip a finger into the cool water, letting ripples blur the reflections. In many Sumerian cities, priests staged divine wrestling dramas reenacting such rivalries, sometimes using puppets or effigies on wooden poles. No stage survives here, but faint post holes arranged in a semicircle suggest wooden supports once held painted backdrops. Some archaeologists argue these backdrops depicted mountain landscapes, emphasizing Enki's ties to distant highlands. Others insist they showed celestial vistas rendered in gold leaf, elevating Inanna's astral sovereignty. Historians are still debating whether Aratta's dramatists prioritized water myths or sky myths in their ritual performances. As dusk deepens, you find yourself guided to a small shrine where incense coils burn in bronze censers shaped like coiled serpents. A dual symbol, some say, of Enki's wisdom serpent and Inanna's underworld guardians. You close your eyes. You slip through a narrow portal carved into the temple's limestone wall and enter the dimly lit scribal gallery where the clay tablets lie in orderly rows on low mud brick shelves. The air smells of fresh clay and reed smoke, and your sandals whisper on the packed earth floor. You pause before a lexicon tablet labeled Sumerian Akkadian Word List 3, its surface etched with parallel columns of cuneiform signs. Here, the name Aratta appears mid-column, set opposite the Akkadian gloss Aratta, marking its passage from Sumerian speech into the Semitic tongue of empire. You run your fingertip along the wedge-shaped strokes, imagining the UR3 schoolmaster guiding a young scribe. Write Aratta, then translate. Don't spill your beer. Humorous margin jests survive. A student once scribbled, Aratta is in my nightmares. Mainstream epigraphers confirm that bilingual lexical lists like this were standard pedagogical tools around 2100 BCE, ensuring new generations learned both the prestige Sumerian and the rising Akkadian tongue. As you move past the lexical shelves, you glimpse a fist-sized fragment of a curriculum tablet with a practice student's handwriting. The exercise reads, Dan Nijin Dumayu-tu Lugal Aratta, the High Judge, son of U2, King of Aratta. This odd line suggests scribes once treated Aratta as a historical realm worthy of grammatical drills. A little-known discovery from a 1920s UR excavation uncovered dozens of such school fragments, each using Aratta in syntax practice, even though no local annals ever mention that dynasty. Some scholars propose these exercises reflect the city's legendary status. Scribal schools taught Aratta as myth history, blending real and poetic geographies. Others insist the drills preserve memories of an actual polity now lost under floodplain silt. Historians are still debating whether these practice lines reflect genuine history or scribal fancy. You turn a corner into the epistolary gallery, where dusty bully enclose offers of tribute and diplomatic letters. A broken bulla bears the seal of an UR2 governor, its impression faint but discernible. A stylized mountain with a copper ingot beneath, Sumerian shorthand for Aratta. Inside, a folded tablet begins. To King Ibi-Sin, the lord of Aratta sends greetings of lapis and bronze. That single line survived centuries beneath debris, a solitary echo confirming Aratta's name traveled south in official correspondence. Mainstream translators accept this as evidence of actual diplomatic exchange, albeit undocumented elsewhere. Yet a minority of philologists propose this letter is a later forgery, inserted in the archive to bolster UR's claim over remote regions. The debate hinges on the tablet's unusually precise seal impression, which some argue was too crisp for its purported age. Historians are still debating the letter's authenticity. Continuing deeper, you enter a small alcove dimly lit by oil lamps hung from reed brackets. Here, a copy of the En-mer-kar list sits in a neat row. You find the entry for Inanna, where a scribal gloss reads, Aratta's bride, to Massatu Aratta, linking the goddess's cult titles to the fabled city. That gloss is rare. Most Widener lists omit regional epithets. A fringe theory posits that this edition of the list originated in Aratta, then exported to Nippur to highlight local patronage. Mainstream consensus, however, holds that glosses were often added by visiting scholars, not original compilers. Whether the gloss reflects genuine Arattan scribal practice or the whims of itinerant priests remains contested in specialist journals. You shift to a low bench piled with fragments of old Babylonian astronomical diaries. One fragment mentions a constellation called Mul-Arrata, Star of Aratta, rising at dusk in the month of Abu. This name appears only once, yet it sparked centuries of astrological commentary. Mainstream historians place these diaries around 1700 BCE, part of Babylon's evolving celestial catalogue. An obscure Assyriologist suggests the Aratta star corresponds to the Pleiades cluster, modest in brightness yet culturally rich. Others insist the reference conflates Aratta with a later city of Aratu further northwest, arguing identical names caused scribal confusion. The identity of Mul-Arrata remains a hotly contested question in archaeoastronomy. Beyond the star catalogue, you discover a small Hittite clay tablet, part of the Bagaskoi archives, that transliterates Aratta in the context of a mythic array of lands conquered by a storm god. You trace those signs with wonder. Hittite scribes borrowed Old Babylonian sign forms to echo Sumerian names. A little-known footnote in the Bagaskoi excavation report describes this tablet as the only known Western mention of Aratta. That claim propelled debates about the reach of Sumerian lore into Anatolian royal courts. Mainstream historians now accept some cultural exchange between Mesopotamia and Hittite centers by the early 2nd millennium BCE. Still, others argue the Hittite Aratta refers to a different land, perhaps remote Assyria, highlighting the perennial problem of shared toponyms. Historians are still debating how far the legend of Aratta actually traveled. You slip next into a shadowed chamber where a Neo-Assyrian clay prism recounts King Sennacherib's campaigns. In a list of conquered lands appears Aratta IA, ending with a terse royal summary. Aratta IA sits in reeds beyond the Great River. This passing reference astonished 19th century scholars, who leapt to connect it to the ancient Bronze Age city. Mainstream view now treats Aratta IA as a late Persian period marsh district near Babylon rather than the legendary realm. Yet a few robust voices maintain that Sennacherib's scribes resurrected the ancient name to evoke storied grandeur, invoking Aratta symbolically rather than geographically. The prism's meaning remains a matter of scholarly contention. You emerge into a corridor lined with fragments of Elamite tablets bearing a similar cluster of signs. Artta. Some argue this Elamite Arta echoes the Sumerian Aratta, suggesting shared or contested claims to frontier territories by neighboring kingdoms. Yet others counter that the Elamite signs denote an entirely different place, Ardatu, recorded in Persian epics and Middle Elamite chronicles. Without bilingual glosses, the phonetic overlap leaves both possibilities open. Historians are still debating whether the Elamite Arta/Ardatu shares any real connection with the fabled Bronze Age metropolis. A sudden draft draws you to a pedestal where a fragment of an Akkadian incantation tablet lies. The ritual instructs, invoke Aratta's name thrice to bind the river's will. This magical usage of a city's name as an incantation formula is unusual. Most water binding spells cite Enki or Enlil rather than geographic toponyms. Obscure folk magic scholars propose that Aratta's reputation for hydraulic mastery inspired this spell's inclusion, an echo of the city's ancient engineering prowess. Mainstream practitioners, however, question whether the reference to Aratta reflects an actual tradition or a late-period literary embellishment to add exotic flair. The authenticity of this incantation remains under debate. You pass into a narrow antechamber where two halves of a single bilingual stela stand, one side in Sumerian, the other in early Old Persian. The inscription praises a goddess named Aratta, wife of the Persian king Cyrus. Clearly not the same Aratta. Yet the name's appearance so late in history is remarkable. Some historians view this as mere coincidence. Aryan roots in Old Persian names sometimes coincide with Mesopotamian words. Others argue for a literary echo. Persian scribes consciously borrowed Sumerian grandeur for royal propaganda. The question of onomastic coincidence versus intentional revival still divides scholars. The gallery's final corner houses a recently unearthed archive of Neo-Babylonian administrative tablets from Sippar. A handful reference the lands of Aratta, listed among far-flung provinces supplying fish oil and reed mats. These lists treat Aratta as a living economic district in the 6th century BCE, long after the Bronze Age collapse. Mainstream economic historians caution that administrative nomenclature often outlives the places it originally described. Yet alternative readings suggest that by invoking Aratta, scribes tapped mythic memory to legitimize royal claims over marsh regions. The precise identity of Sippar's Aratta provinces remains contested. Stepping back into the gallery's entrance, you trace your journey across languages. From Sumerian into Akkadian, Hittite, Elamite, Old Persian, and beyond, each echo reshaping Aratta's name. Each scribal hand adding nuance or confusion. You marvel at how a city buried under floods retained its name as a linguistic ghost, shifting shape with every tongue that spoke it. Some echoes ring clear, others distorted beyond recognition. Yet all attest to the power of words to outlast stone walls and brick foundations. You gather a handful of clay from beneath the lexicon shelf, pale silt flecked with crushed tablets, and let it sift through your fingers. Each grain symbolizes a fragment of Aratta's name. You step onto the low rise marking Aratta's western boundary just as the sun slips beneath morning mist, revealing the city's final fate in a palette of mud and reed shadows. All around you, broken walls rise in shallow mounds, half collapsed by centuries of marsh creep and shifting silt. Where once bronze gates gleamed in torchlight, now only corroded hinges jut from cracked mud brick. You feel the soggy earth give under your sandals, each step a soft squelch that echoes like a lament. In the years around 2200 BCE, during the so-called 4.2 kilo-year climate event, prolonged droughts and punctuated storms disrupted Sumerian city-states. Mainstream geology ties that abrupt climatic shift to reduced river flow and agricultural failure across Mesopotamia, pushing urban centers to the brink and triggering waves of abandonment. You pause at the base of what once held a soaring temple wall, now a tangle of reeds sprouting from horizontal bricks. Your fingers brush algae-green patina on a tilted column base, evidence that periodic floods submerged these ruins even as drought stalked the hinterlands. Obscure paleo-environmental studies from nearby marsh cores reveal alternating layers of wind-blown dust and fine silt, suggesting cycles of desiccation followed by flash inundations. These dual extremes, failing crops one season, devastating floods the next, would have tested even the most seasoned hydraulic engineers. Historians are still debating whether Aratta's ultimate downfall was driven more by human overreach in canal building or by divine whim manifest in climate's extremes. You press onward, following a grass-choked causeway that bisects the ruins like a cracked spine. On either side, you glimpse foundation trenches where stonemasons once laid out palace courtyards. Now the trenches brim with stagnant water, home to bullfrogs that croak in low, insistent tones. You kneel to examine the muddy water and spy a glint of metal just beneath the surface, a fragment of bronze sheeting carved with floral patterns. You fish it out and trace the embossed petals, marveling at how such artistry endures even as the city sinks. A few scattered shards like this have turned up in fishing nets for millennia, leading local storytellers to call the reeds bronze gardens. Whether that term stems from genuine memories of gleaming workshops or from later romantic invention remains a point of lively scholarly debate. Up ahead, a yawning breach in the levee reveals where the Euphrates once tore through the city's outskirts. You crouch at the breach's edge and peer into the cutbank. Layers of densely packed bricks give way to a foot of silted clay. Mainstream hydraulic studies document such levee failures as common when river flow exceeded 2 meters above flood stage. Yet an alternative theory suggests that a sudden earthquake, a minor jolt along a buried fault line, might have dislodged that section, triggering a catastrophic avulsion. Archaeoseismic models show that even small tremors can weaken earthen embankments. Historians are still debating whether flood or quake served as the death knell for Aratta's defenses. Shifting your gaze inland, you see the remains of residential blocks. Rows of half-submerged rooms where mud brick walls lean drunkenly, windows opening onto nothing. In one chamber, the faded imprint of a reed-woven mat clings to the floor, its parallel lines faint but unmistakable. This reed imprint floor was once common in Sumerian dwellings, providing insulation against damp and insects. A little-known excavation note from the 1930s remarks on unusually large reed leaves used here, twice the width found in UR, prompting speculation that Aratta cultivated a special marsh grass. Whether that larger reed was a local innovation or a trade import from distant wetlands remains under scholarly contention. Beyond the domestic quarter lies the artisan district, where workshops once pulsed with the forging of bronze. You follow a narrow muddy track to a circular pit ringed with shattered crucibles. Slag mounds nearby confirm hours of smelting, now silent. You scoop a handful of granular slag and let it sift through your fingers. Green glassy fragments that once seethed with molten copper. Metallurgists have analyzed similar slag from southern sites, showing arsenic-rich compounds that yielded harder bronze alloys. Yet some debris from Aratta contains trace vanadium, a metal not otherwise known in Mesopotamia's Bronze Age. A fringe hypothesis suggests Aratta's smiths clandestinely traded for ores from the Iranian plateau, but mainstream scholars question whether vanadium might simply reflect geological contamination. The debate over Aratta's export-grade metallurgy endures. You climb a low earthen platform, what remains of the ziggurat terrace, and stand among broken column drums and scattered cone inlays. From this vantage, you survey rings of ruined streets once filled with priests, merchants, and weavers. Now only the hush of reed beds answers your presence. You imagine the sight during Aratta's zenith. Bronze acolytes bearing polished bowls, lapis-studded priests chanting by torchlight, the ziggurat steps lined with offerings. In those heady days, the city buzzed with commerce and devotion. Yet by the time of its collapse, inscriptions suggest temple revenues fell by more than half within a generation, foreshadowing dwindling priesthoods and abandoned shrines. Historians are still debating whether financial crisis or ecological breakdown weighed more heavily on Aratta's decline. Descending the platform, you enter a narrow alley leading to the canal basin. The walls here bear faint graffiti, wedge marks carved by bored youths waiting for canal work. One reads Luerat slays the carp, a childish boast echoing the city's royal line. You are Aratt, Neen Aratt, Luerat. Whether Luerat refers to a real king or a mythic champion is disputed. King lists place Luerat's reign centuries before the crisis, but stray graffiti suggests the name survived in folk memory. Some epigraphers argue the graffiti reflects unauthorized scribal practice by canal workers, while others see it as evidence of enduring dynastic pride clinging to memory even as houses fell. The canal side opens onto a sunken courtyard ringed by half-collapsed columns. At its center stands a single intact column drum carved with a scene of Enki rescuing humanity from water's wrath. His spouted vessel tilted in relief, water streaming in arcing lines. This image, once part of a larger frieze, is now the city's lone guardian. You reach out and touch the carved water, feeling the cold stone's smoothness beneath your palm. The scene reminds you that Aratta's story ends the way it began, with water's power to create and destroy. Some scholars interpret this preserved relief as a final act of protection, priests carving one last prayer to the god of fresh water, while others see it as part of a routine restoration effort cut short by crisis. Historians continue to argue both sides. You wander past collapsed market stalls, where shards of painted pottery lie among reed bundles and broken grinding stones. A tile painted with a single fish motif catches your eye, its scales rendered in cobalt blue pigment, unusual for Sumerian ceramics. Some experimental pigment studies suggest cobalt began to appear in Mesopotamia from Iranian sources around 2300 BCE, implying Aratta's potters accessed early cobalt ore trade. Yet mainstream ceramicists caution that the pigment may derive from ochre leachate reacting with kiln atmospheres, producing a deceptive blue tint. Whether that fish tile marks a genuine innovation or a kiln accident remains under scholarly debate. Your final stop is the city gate, now a collapsed heap where massive threshold stones lie half-buried. You imagine the clang of bronze doors swinging shut for the last time, a final act before bodies fled or died within. Stories in later texts speak of refugees carrying bronze idols into marsh boats, drifting until their hands cramped, then abandoning their gods to reeds and water. Archaeological surveys have found one such idol's head, twisted bronze eyes still reflecting moonlight, in marsh peat. Mainstream interpretation sees that find as evidence of ritual abandonment, but a minority argues the idol was looted and lost. Historians are still debating whether those scattered idols mark pious sacrifice or opportunistic scavenging. As you step beyond the ruins into open plain, you turn for one last look at Aratta's skeleton. The rising sun ignites the horizon in sickle shapes, and the reed-fringed moat glints with dew. You feel the city's silence press against your ears like a held breath. Though the walls crumble and memory frays, Aratta's story persists in broken bricks, faded reliefs, and scattered artifacts. Archaeologists still debate the specifics: climate versus conflict, flood versus famine. But the final collapse remains a lesson carved in mud and metal, that even the greatest bronze city can slip beneath Earth's slow tides. Now you ease back from the edges of the ruins, feeling the soft give of silt beneath each step as if walking on a gentle pillow of memory. The sun climbs higher, warming your shoulders, but you move slowly, deliberately, savoring the hush around you. Each reed-lined channel and broken stone holds a fragment of story, and you carry each one lightly in your heart. Let your breath find the rhythm of the wind through the marsh, steady, deep, and